on standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you and a very happy Monday. It's 3 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and, of course, all across the UK. Coming up, there's yet more bad news for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He's facing yet another by-election after former Tory MP Scott Benton resigned. Another nightmare on Downing Street. Next up, Shamima Begum has lost her initial bid to challenge the loss of her British citizenship. I know, get out the Kleenex. And after the Princess of Wales went public on her cancer diagnosis, we'll hear why that decision could help lots of other people who are suffering from the same dreadful illness. That's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Always a fantastic pleasure to have your company. We've got a cracking week ahead. We've got a cracking show ahead. Later in the show today, I'll have an exclusive interview with a close associate of the Batley Grammar School teacher. 3 years on, he's been in hiding, too afraid to work, too afraid to leave his home, in hiding after those Islamist death threats. Today, a report out by Dame Sarah Khan is calling for such protests to be outlawed. Is it enough? Is it too little, too late? Can we stop the rot at the heart of our school system? De facto blasphemy laws creeping in via the back door. We'll have all of that, plus this nightmare news, another by-election for the Conservative Party, this time Scott Benton resigning, plus the farmers' protests. The farmers are revolting. They'll be rolling into Westminster just around the corner soon. We'll have all of the latest when they start turning up on their tractors. But before all of that, it's time for your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you very much. We start with some breaking news. Rishi Sunak is facing another by-election in a red wall seat after Scott Benton resigned as an MP. The Blackpool South MP was already facing a recall petition. Benton, who's now an independent, was found to have broken Commons rules when he was caught by the Times newspaper offering to act on behalf of gambling investors. An independent panel upheld a decision by the Standards Committee, which Mr Benton had appealed against. The Prime Minister says the UK is taking measures to protect itself from the epoch-defining challenge of an increasingly assertive China. It's after recent cyber attacks which saw hackers access millions of voters' personal details and target MPs and peers who've been critical of Beijing. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden is due to address Parliament today over those threats, with the Prime Minister insisting the government will stop at nothing to protect the British public.
We've been very clear that the situation now is that China is behaving in an increasingly assertive way abroad, authoritarian at home, and it represents an epoch-defining challenge and also the greatest state-based threat to our economic security. So it's right that we take measures to protect ourselves, which is what we are doing. To give some specific examples, we've used our new national security investment powers to block investment from China into sensitive technology sectors like semiconductors. Our National Security Act and others means that we can take any other steps that we need to.
Former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan Smith has urged the government to take tougher action.
We must now enter a new era of relations with China, dealing with the contemporary Chinese Communist Party as it really is, not as we would wish it to be. And today's announcement should mark a watershed moment where the UK takes a stand for values of human rights and the international rules-based system upon which we all depend. China should immediately be labelled as a threat, not as an epoch-defining systemic challenge in the integrated review.
A £200 million package of investment aimed at securing the future of the country's nuclear industry has been unveiled. Rishi Sunak has declared a critical national endeavour as he vows to strengthen the nuclear industry and boost jobs. He's introduced a new fund backed by £20 million in public money to support growth in Burrow and Furness, the home of Britain's submarine programmes, and a further £180 million a year over the next decade, which Downing Street says will provide grants to local organisations. Former ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an initial bid to challenge the removal of her British citizenship at the Supreme Court. Last year, Ms Begum lost her first appeal against the decision to revoke her citizenship on national security grounds at the Special Immigration Appeals Commission. It's after she was found in a Syrian refugee camp following her travel to the country as a 15-year-old in 2015 to join the so-called Islamic State terror group. Earlier this year, 3 judges at the Court of Appeal unanimously dismissed her bid to overturn the SIAC decision. The Crown Prosecution Service has been cleared of wrongdoing in accepting the plea of triple killer Valdo Calacane without going to trial. Grace Amali-Kuma and Barnaby Webber, along with school caretaker Ian Coates, were killed in June last year in a spate of knife attacks whilst Calacane was suffering from schizophrenia. He was sentenced to a hospital order instead of being sent to prison. His Majesty's Crown Prosecution Inspectorate said the correct decision was made in accepting manslaughter pleas on the grounds of diminished responsibility. 2 men have been found guilty of murdering a footballer on the dance floor of a nightclub on Boxing Day. 23-year-old Cody Fisher was killed shortly before midnight by a masked group at the Crane Club in Birmingham in 2022. Police have released CCTV footage of the night Cody was stabbed to death. 23-year-old Remy Gordon and 22-year-old Cammy Carpenter were convicted today. A third defendant, 19-year-old Regan Anderson, was found not guilty of murder. A review led by independent government advisor Dame Sara Khan has been published today, pointing to chilling levels of harassment posing a serious threat to schools. It found more than 75% of the public feel they can't speak their mind, and 27% have employed security or moved homes or jobs. As part of her review, Dame Sara is recommending the establishment of an exclusion zone for protests outside of schools. She told GB News victims need more support from the police.
Many victims, again, they told me repeatedly, was that the police are saying this hasn't crossed any criminal threshold. It might be because some of this behaviour is taking place on online forums and is not being sent directly to the victim. That doesn't lessen the impact on victims who are seeing this behaviour online that's being directed towards them. So again, this is why I'm saying, as one of my recommendations to the government, is that all 39 police forces in England should have a police officer who specialises in harassment legislation, malicious communications, as well, that are able to provide support to victims, because they are often overlooked and not necessarily even seen as victims.
And Boeing has announced a major management shake-up in the wake of safety concerns. The CEO and other senior executives are to step down from the aircraft manufacturer by the end of this year. The company have been under pressure following an incident where a panel blew out at 16,000 feet on an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 MAX in January. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Martin.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now we start with the story we broke in the last hour, and it's yet more bad news for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He's facing yet another by-election after former Tory MP Scott Benton resigned. Well, I'm joined in our Westminster studio by our political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, welcome to the show. It's a Monday. We've got a cracking week ahead. Bad news for Rishi Sunak. On the first day of the week, we knew a by-election was coming, but now sooner than we thought.
Yes, his hand's been forced. Because we knew it was coming probably because Scott Benton was an independent MP. He lost a whip in a lobbying scandal. He was recorded suggesting to undercover reporters from the Times newspaper that he would be willing to break lobbying rules for money. The ban was for 35 days by Parliament. Any more than 10 days triggers a referendum on a recall by-election. That started 4 weeks ago, and it looks like Scott Benton has jumped before the result of that was known. So there was going to be a by-election probably before the end of the summer. It now looks happening in short order. Scott Benton has now written to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. He does that because the process is that Jeremy Hunt must then make him the MP for a certain made-up seat in the House of Commons. That means he can then stand down, stop being an MP. So the clock is ticking now on whether the Tories can hold this seat. It looks unlikely. It's a majority of just fewer than 4,000 in a seat won by Mr Benton in 2019, the first time it had gone Tory since 2002.
This is it. So it was always really a true Labour seat. It went because it was a Brexit seat. Blackpool, of course, a massive Brexit majority. They went with Boris to get Brexit done, and now it's ended badly. Labour are going to absolutely bombard this seat with activists. They're going to go gung-ho to take it, and the bookies probably got them nailed on as favourites.
You'd have thought so. I mean, unless you might have some independent candidates standing to try and take some support away from Labour, but it's hard to see Labour losing this. Another repeated worry here for Mr Sunak. I mean, we're looking at my colleagues here at GB News at the sheer numbers of by-elections. There's been 12 since October 2022. That's about one every 6 or 7 weeks, would you believe it, on average. Of course, some held on the same days. The Tories have lost 6 of them. So history says this will be a 7th for the Tory party.
And you spoke earlier to Dame Sarah Khan.
That's right. Dame Sarah Khan has got this review out today on social resilience and cohesion. I think it's fascinating. I think she's really going into an area which GB News viewers do care about. Let's have a listen to what she said earlier to me.
So what I describe in my report is this phenomenon called freedom-restricting harassment, which is when people experience or witness threatening, intimidatory or abusive harassment, either online or offline, which is then intended to make individuals or institutions self-censor out of fear. And so what our polling shows is that around 3/4 of the British public feel that they cannot share their personal opinion in public out of fear of receiving freedom-restricting harassment. And you'll be aware that there's been a lot of debate over the last couple of months, even years, about how parliamentarians and those in public life have been at the forefront of such abuse and harassment. What my report shows for the first time is that this is a much broader phenomenon where people such as academics and teachers, counsellors, journalists, civic society activists, people working in the arts and cultural sector are experiencing this awful kind of freedom-restricting harassment.
So, of course, that report is out because it's the 3rd anniversary of the Batley Grammar School teacher being forced into hiding. In fact, in the next hour, we're going to speak to a friend, close associate of his, for an update. A very, very important report calling for an end to the mobs that are gathering outside schools, of course, not just in Batley, but it happened at the Berkeley School, in Leighton. Pro-Palestine protesters forced that school to be closed.
And she said to me that that's the tip of the iceberg. There are other cases too. She has talked to the teacher. I know you're talking to a friend of the teacher shortly, Martin. He's in bits. He's had no compensation offering, no protection almost from anyone in central government. It's fascinating to hear from Sarah Khan. 3/4 of people feel they can't express their views. Not just teachers, counsellors, journalists, academics. There's a chilling effect, I think, by the attack on speech by both from the right and from the left, and that's what she's concerned about.
OK, well, stick around, Chris. We're going to keep on talking on that topic now, and I'm joined by Stephen Evans, who's the Chief Executive of the National Secular Society. Welcome to the show, Stephen. So, a report 3 years on, almost to the day when the Batley Grammar School teacher was forced into hiding, calling out shocking levels of self-censorship, of public fear, bowing to the mob. These protests will be called time on due to this report. Do you think it's too little too late?
No, I think it's to be welcomed. I think there's some really good stuff in there. I'm really happy that this is finally being looked at. Clearly, there is growing religious diversity here in Britain. And while that can be a strength, I think it does need to be managed and nurtured. And given the current winds that we've got towards growing religious fundamentalism, Islamism, extremism, polarisation and the growth of disinformation, I think we really do need to take social cohesion seriously and actively look at how we can better create a more cohesive society and promote liberal democratic values better. And I think this report today from Sarah Khan is a really good, necessary contribution to that.
But don't you think, looking back 3 years almost to the day, the Batley Grammar School teacher was totally abandoned by his school, by his head teacher, by his union, by his Member of Parliament? I myself went up there 2 years ago and spoke at a rally in the town square. Not a single politician, not a single person in power ever spoke out. So while I share your enthusiasm that this is good news, it's good news it's taken a long time to come. Such is the climate of fear around pushing back against the Islamist mob.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely agree. One of the recommendations actually in this report that I'm quite enthusiastic about is this development of, or suggestion that we should have a cross-Whitehall cohesion response unit. That's something we at the National Secular Society have been calling for ever since the incident in Batley. So that means when flashpoints occur, such as in Batley and Kettlethorpe, I think schools have largely been left to fend for themselves against the mob. And I think sometimes they've understandably, I suppose, at times taken the path of least resistance. So kind of there's a tendency to try and placate the mob. But, this giving in to the mob in the hope of a quiet life, it really just stores up more trouble for the future. And if we look at what happened in Batley, there was an apology immediately, the teacher was suspended, there was an acceptance immediately from the school that the resources used to teach about fundamental British values and free expression, those resources were unacceptable, said the school straight away. So they capitulated to the mob straight away. They really threw the teacher under the bus, we thought. And I think those with the broadest shoulders really need to step in, and that is the government. So this kind of cross-Whitehall cohesion response unit, I think, is a good development because it means that straight away the government can step in and take the measures necessary to protect fundamental freedoms, to protect our democracy, and not leave schools to fend for themselves, which I think has been a big part of the problem.
Scott, Chris Hope here in the studio with Martin. Why do you think those with the broader shoulders, as you say, have not stepped up to protect people like the Batley teacher and others?
Well, I think instinctively the government likes to leave schools to manage things locally, given the local circumstances, and that's that's not, not necessarily a bad approach in most cases. But when we're talking about threats from Islamist fundamentalists, I think that's more than schools and maybe local authorities and local police forces even can cope with. I think we need a more coordinated response from the government. So I think there's just a tendency to kind of defer the situation to local authorities and let it be dealt with locally. But as I say, sometimes the situation's too grave, too big, and the stakes are too high. Look at the Batley teacher, went into hiding, is now living under a new identity. So the stakes are really high. So that's why I think the government should step in instances like that.
OK, Stephen Evans, the Chief Executive of the National Secular Society, thank you very much for joining us on the show. And indeed, we'll speak to a close friend of the teacher in the next hour and ask him if he thinks this is enough. Now, before we go, Chris, hope you got an update on the Scott Benton situation.
That's right. There's a colleague called Jack Elson from The Sun. He says that Rich will be moved tomorrow for the Blackpool South by-election. That means that by-election can be held on, guess what, May the 2nd.
Oh, dear.
Local election day. We're now facing a dramatic by-election on the same day as a series of local elections which could cause problems for Rishi Sunak in their results.
And timing-wise, that really will be an unwanted May Day present. I mean, that really is... there's a lot of fear about these council elections anyway going the wrong way, to whack a by-election on top.
Yeah, you might say May Day, May Day.
Indeed.
Because it's going to be very difficult, I think, for the Tories to hold on to that. A line with that, there'll be big problems, I think, in holding on to lots of council seats. That weekend will be a huge one for the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Superb stuff. As ever, Chris Hope, thanks for joining me in the studio. See you in the next hour. Now it's time for our spring giveaway now, and it's the final week to see how you could win gadgets, a shopping spree, and an amazing 12,345 quid. That's £1,2,345 tax-free. Make sure you don't miss out. You've got to be in it to win it, and here's the details you need to get your claws on the cash.
It's the final week to see how you could win big. You could win an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash that you could spend however you like. Plus, there's a further £500 of shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. We'll also give you a gadget package to use in your garden this spring. That includes a games console, a pizza oven and a portable smart speaker, so you can listen to GB News on the go. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Get stuck in. Now, Shamima Begum has lost her initial bid to challenge the removal of her British citizenship at the Supreme Court. But why won't she take no for an answer? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The Victoria and Albert Museum in London has been accused of calling the former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher a villain.
The caption read, "Over the years, the evil character in this seaside puppet show has shifted from the devil, which it was originally apparently, to unpopular public figures, including Adolf Hitler, Osama bin Laden and Margaret Thatcher."
Well, let's talk to political commentator and housing expert Russell Quirk and former miner David Craddock. Good to see you both this morning. Russell, what do you think?
No, of course not. She's probably one of the two best prime ministers that this country's ever had, alongside Winston Churchill. She was a woman of conviction, of proper ideology, and she literally pulled Britain up by its bootstraps. So, no, she's a hero.
How do you balance that out against the idea that she did, as Russell said, pull Britain up by the bootstraps? You were the sick man of Europe.
We were the sick man of Europe, as Russell says, but her methods were not the means of getting us out of trouble. All she did was turned finance towards the private pocket rather than to services, and as a result, Britain suffered in the long term.
It's interesting that you bring that up, though, because a lot of people do look at the sort of perilous state our politics is in at the moment, and they quote people like Margaret Thatcher. They say, if only we had people who were a bit more like Margaret Thatcher, we wouldn't be in the trouble we're in now.
It's just unfortunate she's not around now, because I think she put current politicians to shame, don't you?
Yeah, but the reality with this, Russell, to do that, she was quite happy to break a lot of eggs. And she did that without a lot of remorse.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:23 and I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, they're a great British tradition and a huge part of the local community, but lollipop men and women could be an endangered species. Hampshire County Council is considering plans to sack 21 lollipop men and women as part of a raft of measures to save £1.1 million. He says there simply aren't enough pedestrian and vehicle movements to warrant the cost of some of these patrols. But parents say the cost-cutting measures could endanger the lives of their children. Our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody has this story.
Sharon Woodford has been guiding children across this street in Holbury in Hampshire for 32 years.
She's phenomenal. She's phenomenal. She knows every single child by their name. So it doesn't matter how old they are. It doesn't matter how old they are or anything. Yeah, she's been amazing.
I don't know how I remember their names, but I do.
You must really care.
Yes, I do. And it'd be a shame to see it go, but what do? You know.
Sharon's been told she may be losing her job, as the council says the road's not busy enough to warrant her salary. And she's not alone. 21 lollipop men and women in Hampshire are facing the chop in cost-cutting measures that may mean the end of school crossing patrols altogether. Parents are angry.
I think it's ridiculous. She's here every day, twice a day, getting us across this road safely. It's the main road to going through this area. A lot of the kids that go to that school, they walk on their own from that direction, so they're on their own. So I just think that with all the money flying around in the world at the moment, the least they could do is afford to fund this wonderful person getting us across the road.
Like many councils, Hampshire County Council says it's running out of cash. They say they have a hole in their budget to the tune of £132 million. After coming for 21 lollipop men and women, the remaining 163 school crossing patrols could be removed as well. In a statement, Hampshire County Council said, whilst we have a legal duty to promote road safety and take measures to prevent accidents, there is no specific legal requirement for us to provide school crossing patrols, of which there are currently 184 in Hampshire. We know that local communities value their school crossing patrol officers, and this is not a reflection on individuals undertaking that role. But there may be effective alternatives for some sites, such as installing permanent safety measures or improvements to make a crossing point safer. But locals say these cuts put their children's lives at risk.
I think it's stupid because this road can be very fast, and like a load of the kids just come flying across, and she's there. She's like the safety hub of the road.
Hampshire County Council says 13 services are facing cuts, from household waste recycling centres to bus services. Parents in Holbury have got together a petition to try and save Sharon Woodford's job. The council says it hasn't made any firm decisions yet and will only remove the service if a crossing can be made safe. Lollipop men and women have been a mainstay outside our schools for 7 decades. For many, they're as British as fish and chips. But if councils can't balance their books, these stalwarts at our school gates may become a thing of the past. Jeff Moody, GB News.
Gotta love a lollipop lady. Now, Shamima Begum has lost her initial bid to challenge the removal of her British citizenship at the Supreme Court. She had her citizenship revoked on national security grounds, of course, and she travelled to Syria as a 15-year-old in 2015 and was branded at the time the ISIS bride. Well, we've had lots and lots of emails on this topic already, and of course, it's hugely divisive. It really does divide you down. A lot of people say Shamima Begum sacrificed the right to her British nationality, her passport, the moment she joined the Islamist death cult ISIS, which of course wanted at the time Western civilization wiped off the face of the earth. The caliphate they wanted us gone. A lot of rumours that she saw treacherous things was a part of that. But then, of course, people in her defence say she was only 15, she was groomed while she was in Britain and then travelled to Syria. And how can she be held responsible for that? And that she is, whether we like it or not, a British citizen and should face justice here. Let me know what you think on this, of course, gbviews@gbnews.com. And let's have a couple of your early emails now. Kiwi says this: I disagree with you on this one. She is British. I don't want Shamima Begum back, but she is our problem. I'd also like to use the publicity, bringing her background, raising that up to spotlight the radicalisation of young British people to Islamists in UK mosques. Shamima Begum could be a huge deterrent to stop radicalisation of British Muslims on our own soil. But Dave disagrees. He says if she came back to the UK, Shamima Begum would have a taxpayer-funded life forever. That would hardly be a deterrent, would it? In fact, it would be a pretty good recruitment act. Go abroad, hate Britain, come back and live off the taxpayer for the rest of your days. She could never work, she'd never be able to do anything. She'd be a constant liability to British taxpayers. And on the same point, Paul adds this: how much is this debacle costing British taxpayers? James Cleverly, we demand to be told. Ian adds this: there is now no higher court. Who is Shamima Begum appealing to? Well, I suspect it may end up going to our friends at the European Court of Human Rights. This might go to Strasbourg, and then we'll have an almighty legal wrangle, not just on our shores, but beyond. Savon adds this: although I fully respect the court's decision, but what about an ISIS member in Britain with a different nationality, courts in London? Should their country say Britain should keep them if we revoked their nationality? That's not quite the same thing. Shamima Begum voluntarily, willingly went abroad and saw things abroad. And we don't know what she may have seen or what she may have been involved in. How about she might have seen more than the MI5 are letting on? Well, to discuss this further, I'm now joined by Mesa Gifford, who fought against ISIS with the Syrian Democratic Forces. Welcome to the show, Mesa. Wow, so you've been involved on the front line. What's your take on Shamima Begum being allowed the right to return to the UK?
Well, I think the court's decision is the right one. I think common sense has prevailed. And I think it's about time the British authorities, the British legal system, starts putting ordinary Brits first. You've got to remember, Shamima Begum went out on her own accord to Syria. She was there for 3 years. The MI5 has described her as a real and credible threat in the past. She's failed this attempt to come back. And I'm glad she has, because there are many worse people than Shamima Begum waiting in the wings, watching her case very carefully, and they will take advantage of whatever legal loopholes she finds to come back to make their own case. So this is really stopping a tidal wave of other cases coming along as well.
And briefly, if we could, Mesa, if Begum were to return, could she become a poster girl for future recruits to go and fight abroad too?
Well, it will certainly remind people that by going abroad, committing terrible acts of violence and terror, you'll only get a slap on the wrist when you get back to the UK. So at least by making her an example, by keeping her out of the UK, we're keeping people safe and deterring future people from joining terror groups like ISIS.
Fascinating. So thanks for joining us, Mesa Gifford, who fought against ISIS with the Syrian Democratic Forces. Fascinating guest. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, and GB News viewers can see live pictures now from the House of Commons, where the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, is about to make a statement about a Chinese cyber attack that saw them access the personal details of 40 million Brits. That could well be including you. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. The top stories. Rishi Sunak is facing another by-election in a red wall seat after Scott Benton resigned as an MP. The Blackpool South MP was already facing a recall petition. Benton, who's now an independent, was found to have broken Commons rules when he was caught by the Times newspaper offering to act on behalf of gambling investors. An independent panel upheld the decision by the Standards Committee, which Mr Benton had appealed against. The Prime Minister says the UK is taking measures to protect itself from the epoch-defining challenge of an increasingly assertive China. It's after recent cyber attacks which saw hackers access millions of voters' personal details and target MPs and peers who've been critical of Beijing. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden is currently addressing Parliament over the threats, with the Prime Minister insisting the government will stop at nothing to protect the British public. Former ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an initial bid to challenge the removal of her British citizenship at the Supreme Court. Last year, Ms Begum lost her first appeal against the decision to revoke her citizenship on national security grounds at the Special Immigration Appeals Commission. This after she was found in a Syrian refugee camp following her travel to the country as a 15-year-old in 2015 to join the so-called Islamic State terror group. Earlier this year, 3 judges at the Court of Appeal unanimously dismissed her bid to overturn the SIAC decision. The Crown Prosecution Service has been cleared of wrongdoing in accepting the plea of triple killer Valdo Kalakane without going to trial. Grace O'Malley-Kuma and Barnaby Webber, along with school caretaker Ian Coates, were killed in June last year in a spate of knife attacks while Kalakane was suffering from schizophrenia. He was sentenced to a hospital order instead of being sent to prison. His Majesty's Crown Prosecution Inspectorate said the correct decision was made in accepting the manslaughter pleas on the grounds of diminished responsibility. And some breaking news just in. Former US President Donald Trump has won a bid to pause his $454 million civil fraud judgment if he posts a $175 million bond within 10 days. It's a victory for the former US president that blocks New York state authorities from beginning to seize his assets immediately. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2641 and €1.1668. The price of gold is £1,721.50 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,923 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now we're about to hear from the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. He's going to talk in the House of Commons about a cyber attack from Chinese hackers that gave them access to the personal details of 40 million Brits. And that could include you. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Welcome back to Headliners. And Paul, we're going to get straight into Monday's mail for some good old-fashioned, traditional male breastfeeding.
Yeah. To answer the question, what is the latest woke hell, Josh? Row as hospitals say hormone-filled milk from trans women who were born male is just as good for a baby as the real thing. It's possible for men, if they pump themselves full of estrogen, to grow larger breast tissue, and they often do.
Or you just eat lots of burgers.
Yeah.
And we're going live now to the House of Commons, where the Deputy Prime Minister is making a statement on suspected cyber attacks by China.
And right honourable members on both sides of this chamber will recognise the seriousness of this issue, particularly in a year when so many democratic elections will be taking place around the world. Members will want to be reassured that the government is taking steps to address the associated threat. I can confirm today that Chinese state-affiliated actors were responsible for 2 malicious cyber campaigns targeting both our democratic institutions and parliamentarians. First, the compromise of the United Kingdom Electoral Commission between 2021 and 2022, which was announced last summer. And second, attempted reconnaissance activity against UK parliamentary accounts in a separate campaign in 2021. Later today, a number of our international partners, including the United States, will be issuing similar statements to expose this activity and to hold China to account for the ongoing patterns of hostile activity targeting our collective democracies. Mr. Speaker, you and Parliamentary Security have already been briefed on this activity. We want now to be as open as possible with the House and with the British public, because part of our defence is calling out this behaviour. This is the latest in a clear pattern of hostile activity originating in China, including the targeting of democratic institutions and parliamentarians in the United Kingdom and beyond. We have seen this in China's continued disregard for universal human rights and international commitments in Xinjiang, China's erasure of dissenting voices and stifling of the opposition under the new national security law in Hong Kong, and the disturbing reports of Chinese intimidation and aggressive behaviour in the South China Sea. It is why this government has investigated and called out so-called Chinese overseas police service stations and instructed the Chinese embassy to close them. However, their cumulative attempts to interfere with the United Kingdom's democracy have not succeeded. Last summer, the Electoral Commission stated that it had been a victim of a complex cyber attack between 2021 and 2022. This was the work of Chinese state-affiliated actors. These actors gained access to the Electoral Commission's email and file-sharing systems, which contain copies of the electoral register. As the Electoral Commission stated in 2023, when this attack was first made public, the compromise has not affected the security of elections. It will not impact how people register, vote, or otherwise participate in democratic processes. I want to reassure people that the compromise of this information, whilst it is obviously concerning, typically does not create a risk to those affected. And I want to further reassure the House that the Commission has worked with security specialists to investigate the incident and remove the threat from their systems. The Commission has since taken further steps to increase the resilience of their systems. In addition, the National Cybersecurity Centre assesses it is almost certain that the Chinese-affiliated, state-affiliated cyber actor known as APT-31 attempted to conduct reconnaissance activity against UK parliamentary accounts during a separate campaign in 2021. Honourable members may recall that APT-31 was one of several cyber actors attributed to the Chinese Ministry of State Security by the United Kingdom and its allies in July 2021. This email campaign by APT-31 was blocked by Parliament's cybersecurity measures. In this case, it was entirely unsuccessful. However, any targeting of members of this House by foreign state actors is completely unacceptable. Taken together, the United Kingdom judges that these actions demonstrate a clear and persistent pattern of behaviour that signals hostile intent from China. That is why the United Kingdom has today sanctioned 2 individuals and 1 entity associated with the Chinese state-affiliated APT-31 group for involvement in malicious cyber activity targeting officials, government entities, and parliamentarians around the world. We are today acting to warn of the breadth of targeting emanating from Chinese state-affiliated actors like APT-31, to sanction those actors who attempt to threaten our democratic institutions, and to deter both China and all those who seek to do the same. Mr. Speaker, last week at the Summit for Democracy in Seoul, I said that we would call out malicious attempts to undermine our democracy wherever we find them. This is an important tool in our armoury, and today we are doing just that. The UK does not accept that China's relationship with the United Kingdom is set on a predetermined course, but this depends on the choices that China makes. That is why the Foreign Office will be summoning the Chinese ambassador to account for China's conduct in these incidents. The UK's policy towards China is anchored in our core national interests, where it is consistent with engage with the Chinese government. But we will not hesitate to take swift and robust actions wherever the Chinese government threatens the United Kingdom's interests. We have done so today and previously. This government will continue to hold China and other state actors accountable for their actions. We will also take serious action to prevent this behaviour from affecting our security. The steps we have taken in recent years have made the UK a harder operating environment for foreign state actors seeking to target our values and our institutions. Through the National Security Act, we now have for the first time a specific offence of foreign interference. This new offence will allow law enforcement to disrupt state-linked efforts to undermine our institutions, rights or political system. Our National Security and Investment Act has overhauled our scrutiny of investment into the United Kingdom by giving the government powers to block, unwind or put conditions on investments that could create national security risks. We've significantly reduced China's involvement in the UK's civil nuclear sector, taking ownership of CGN's stake in Sizewell C nuclear power project and ensuring Chinese state-owned nuclear energy corporations will have no further role in the project. We have put in place measures to prevent hostile infiltration of our universities, including protecting campuses from interference through the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. The Procurement Act includes national security development provisions that allow us to act where we see malicious influence in our public procurement. I have taken steps to reduce the government's exposure to Chinese operators, banning Hikvision and TikTok from government buildings and devices. And through the National Cyber Security Strategy, we're investing £2.6 billion to increase the cyber resilience of our critical national infrastructure by 2025, making the most important parts of our digital environment a harder target for state and non-state actors. The government is continuing to build the tools, expertise and knowledge to respond to the systemic challenge that China poses to the United Kingdom's security and its values. The integrated review refresh in 2023 took steps towards this, doubling funding for a government-wide programme, including investment in Mandarin language training and deepening diplomatic expertise. But we must also be clear that this is not a problem for the government to solve alone. That is why we created the National Protective Security Authority within MI5 to help businesses and institutions play their part in protecting our security and prosperity. The NPSA will help organisations in the UK's most sensitive fields, including critical national infrastructure operators and world-leading science and tech sectors, to protect themselves against state threats. It's also why I set up the Economic Security Public-Private Forum to ensure that business leaders in crucial sectors understand the threat to the UK and what they can do to defeat it. And in Parliament, the National Cyber Security Centre has launched an opt-in service for members of both houses. This allows the NCSC to alert high-risk individuals if they identify evidence of malicious activity on their personal devices or account, and swiftly advise them on steps to take to protect their information. Today, the NCSC has published new guidance for political organisations, including political parties and think tanks, which will help these organisations take effective action to protect their systems and their data. The NCSC is also working with all political parties to increase the uptake of their active cyber defence services in the lead up to a general election. A key component of increasing our resilience is supporting the NCSC and parliamentary authorities by taking up this cyber security offer. And so I urge all members of this House to do so, and I will be writing to colleagues later today, setting out again the steps that they can take to do so. At the Summit for Democracy, I was struck by the powerful strength of our collective voices when we work together to defend our democratic freedoms. The summit provided the United Kingdom government with a platform to build international agreement on a new global government compact on countering deceptive use of AI by foreign states in elections. It's important and welcome that our partners across the Five Eyes, as well as those in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, are also standing in solidarity with our efforts to call out malicious cyber activity. I would also like to pay tribute to the dedicated public servants whose painstaking work has continued to expose the reality of the threat we face. Mr. Speaker, our political processes and institutions have not been harmed by these attacks. The government will continue to call out and condemn this kind of activity in the strongest terms. We will continue to work with our allies to ensure that Chinese state-affiliated actors suffer the consequences of their behaviour, and we will take preventative action to ensure these attempts do not succeed. The cyber threat posed by China-affiliated actors is real and it is serious, but it is more than equalled by our determination and resolve to resist it. That is how we defend ourselves and our precious democracy, and I commend this statement to the House.
Can I just say it was an important statement, that's why it has run on quite a lot longer than the normal 10 minutes. So in which case, I'm sure everybody agrees that if the two front benches need a little extra time, of course we'll be flexible exactly in the same way. I now come to the Shadow Secretary, Matt Fadden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement and for advance sight of it. It is, of course, a statement about which there's been significant briefing in the press over the past couple of days. Now, on questions of national security, we will support the government in efforts to counter attempts by China or any other state to interfere with or undermine the democratic process, or attempts to stop elected representatives going about their business, voicing their opinions, or casting their votes without fear or favour. And with that in mind, can I pay tribute to the efforts made every day by the intelligence and security services to protect the public, to protect our democracy and our way of life. The economic relationship between the United Kingdom and China can never mean compromising on national security or our democratic integrity. Now, the Deputy Prime Minister's statement touches on a number of issues, and I'd like to ask him some questions about these. Could he say more about the government's assessment of Chinese motives? Does he, for example, believe that Beijing does want to disrupt our democratic process, or instead to gather data about our citizens for some other reason? On the specific issue of the Electoral Commission and the Electoral Register, why does the Deputy Prime Minister think that the Chinese government hacked what is a publicly available database? Does he believe that they were after details of those who may not be on the public register for very good reasons, because, for example, they might be employed in security-sensitive areas? Does he believe they were after details of political donors and their personal data, or for some other motive? Now, he referred to the democratic electoral process, and with an election coming, it is of course vital that people have confidence in their ability to register and to vote. Can he confirm that the electronic register to vote system that we have is sufficiently well protected? In terms of attacks on parliamentary accounts, the Secretary of State said that the attacks were unsuccessful, but does he believe that China now wants to engage in the kind of hack and leak activity that we have in recent years associated with Russia in order to compromise either individual politicians or the wider democratic process? On the issue of sanctions, only last week the Minister of State was reluctant to respond to the claim that the Foreign Office had indefinitely paused targeted sanctions against Chinese officials late last year. Can the Deputy Prime Minister explain what has changed just in the past week? Now, Mr. Speaker, we are very grateful for the work of the Intelligence and Security Committee and the report they issued on China last year, which covered much of the same ground as the Deputy Prime Minister has covered in his statement today. Paragraph 98 of that report, when discussing individual politicians, said the following, and I quote, "Targets are not limited to serving politicians either. They can include former political figures if they are sufficiently high profile. For example, it is possible that David Cameron's role as Vice President of a £1 billion China-UK investment fund was in some part engineered by the Chinese state to lend credibility to Chinese investment." Close quote. What has the government done to look into this allegation from the Intelligence and Security Committee? How can ministers ensure that those leaving politics are not targeted in the way that the committee discussed? And in that spirit, Mr. Speaker, I've read reports that the Conservative backbench 1922 committee is to be briefed on these matters later today. Given the importance of national and democratic security to all the parties in this House, is the Deputy Prime Minister intending to arrange a briefing for the Leader of the Opposition, the Intelligence and Security Committee, or indeed the other political parties represented in this House? Experts in this field have warned of China's voracious appetite for data and the potential uses of this as computing power improves, for example, as quantum computing develops. Now, the UK's record on data security is patchy, to put it mildly. What is the government doing to protect complex and valuable data sets from being stolen now, possibly in order to be manipulated later by more powerful computers that are controlled by authoritarian adversaries? And finally, Mr. Speaker, on the broader issue, does the fact that the Deputy Prime Minister chose to make this statement today signal a fundamental reassessment of the overall threat? He referred to the United States and our allies. On the 12th of February, the United States administration warned Congress that the cyber threat from China was changing. Previously, a threat that largely involved spying and influencing now looked like it was getting ready to disrupt critical American infrastructure, aviation, energy, healthcare, and other sectors. Is it now the UK's government view that we should change our assessment of the threat in a similar way? If so, this is of the utmost importance, and we would need to know what corresponding improvements the government would make to the preparedness of our critical infrastructure. Because if the threat really has changed, then so too should our response.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions. I'll seek to address as many of them as I can. When it comes to Chinese motivations, ultimately it's a matter for the Chinese to be able to justify their motivations. I think the points he made are both apposite. First of all, I think that the Chinese look at successful democratic countries like the United Kingdom, or indeed Japan and the Republic of Korea, where I was last week, and they want to seek to undermine successful democratic countries. So it's no surprise that they should seek to interfere in electoral processes, just as you have seen conduct from Russia that aligns with that. And indeed, the successful democratic elections we're having around the world right now stand in contrast with the sham elections that we saw in Russia last weekend. On the point about the public record of the Electoral Commission, I think that is the essence of what's happened here. These attacks and these attempts were ultimately pretty unsuccessful. And I would like to reassure the honourable gentleman and members of this House that there was no infiltration of the closed register of the Electoral Commission, so the concerns he raised have not arisen. In terms of further strengthening the electoral register, that's precisely the work that the National Cybersecurity Centre does in coordination with GCHQ, working with government agencies, including the Electoral Commission. He's right to raise the risk of hack and leak. It's certainly something that we saw in previous elections. I remain concerned about hack and leak. I also remain very concerned about artificial intelligence being used to disrupt elections, particularly in relation to deep fakes, hence the work that I undertook at the conference last week and the progress we're making with this accord in relation to artificial intelligence use by malign states. In relation to targeting...
And that was Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, speaking in the Commons on China's cyber threat to the UK. He made the point that cumulative attempts have not succeeded. Chinese agents attempted to get copies of the UK electoral register. It has not impacted elections or votes. The threat has been removed from British systems. He went on to add a further £2.6 billion of investment until 2025 will be allocated to prevent future attacks. Mr. Dowden has summoned the Foreign Office, will summon Chinese ambassador to explain what's going on. But there's been a clear and consistent pattern that shows hostility towards the UK. Today, acting to warn of the breadth of those effects. This is completely unacceptable, and Mr. Dowden pointed out that America, USA will also make very similar statements. So UK and USA joining forces here to make sure this threat as neutralised. OK, we can now move forward for your latest news headlines. It's 4 p.m. and here's Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. The top stories this hour. The Deputy Prime Minister says hackers affiliated to the Chinese state were responsible for 2 malicious cyber campaigns on the Electoral Commission and parliamentarians. Speaking to the Commons, Oliver Daubney says the government wants to be as open as possible with the British public concerning the attack. The Prime Minister earlier said the UK is taking measures to protect itself from the epoch-defining challenge of an increasingly assertive China. He says Chinese state actors have been targeting parliamentarians in the UK and other nations. Rishi Sunak is facing another by-election in a Red Wall seat after Scott Benton resigned as an MP. The Blackpool South MP was already facing a recall petition. Benton, who's now an independent, was found to have broken Commons rules when he was caught by the Times newspaper offering to act on behalf of gambling investors. An independent panel upheld the decision by the Standards Committee, which Mr Benton had appealed against. Former ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an initial bid to challenge the removal of her British citizenship at the Supreme Court. Last year, Ms Begum lost her first appeal against the decision to revoke her citizenship on national security grounds at the Special Immigration Appeals Commission. It's after she was found in a Syrian refugee camp following her travel to the country as a 15-year-old in 2015 to join the so-called Islamic State terror group. Earlier this year, 3 judges at the Court of Appeal unanimously dismissed her bid to overturn the SIAC decision. A £200 million package of investment aimed at securing the future of the country's nuclear industry has been unveiled. Rishi Sunak has declared a critical national endeavour as he vows to strengthen the industry and boost jobs. He's introduced a new fund backed by £20 million in public money to support growth in Barrow-in-Furness, the home of Britain's submarine programmes, and a further £180 million a year over the next decade, which Downing Street says will provide grants to local organisations. The Crown Prosecution Service has been cleared of wrongdoing in accepting the plea of triple killer Valdo Calacane without going to trial. Grace Amali Kuma and Barnaby Webber, along with school caretaker Ian Coates, were killed in June last year in a spate of knife attacks whilst Calacane was suffering from schizophrenia. He was sentenced to a hospital order instead of being sent to prison. His Majesty's Crown Prosecution Inspectorate said the correct decision was made in accepting manslaughter pleas on the grounds of diminished responsibility. 2 men have been found guilty of murdering a footballer on the dance floor of a nightclub on Boxing Day. 23-year-old Cody Fisher was killed shortly before midnight by a masked group at the Crane Club in Birmingham in 2022. Police have released CCTV footage of the night Cody was stabbed to death. 23-year-old Remy Gordon and 22-year-old Cammy Carpenter were convicted today. A third defendant, 19-year-old Regan Anderson, was found not guilty of murder. Donald Trump has won a bid to pause his £360 million civil fraud judgment if he posts a £140 million bond within 10 days. A warning: the following footage contains flashing images. It's a victory for the former US president that blocks New York state authorities from beginning to seize his assets immediately. He'd been facing a deadline today to post bond for the fine, which he was given for inflating his net worth. If he did not meet the deadline, he could have faced having his assets such as Trump Tower or his plane Trump Force One seized. A review led by independent government advisor Dame Sarah Khan has been published, pointing to chilling levels of harassment posing a serious threat to schools. It found more than 75% of the public feel they can't speak their mind, and 27% have employed security or moved jobs or homes. As part of her review, Dame Sarah is recommending the establishment of an exclusion zone for protests outside of schools. She told GB News victims need more support from police.
Many victims, again, they told me repeatedly, was that the police are saying this hasn't crossed any criminal threshold. It might be because some of this behaviour is taking place on online forums and is not being sent directly to the victim. That doesn't lessen the impact on victims who are seeing this behaviour online that's being directed towards them. So again, this is why I'm saying, as one of my recommendations to the government, is that all 39 police forces in England should have a police officer who specialises in harassment legislation, malicious communications, as well, that are able to provide support to victims, because they are often overlooked and not necessarily even seen as victims.
And Boeing has announced a major management shake-up in the wake of safety concerns. The CEO and other senior executives are to step down from the aircraft manufacturer by the end of this year. The company have been under pressure following an incident where a panel blew out at the 16,000 feet on an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 MAX in January. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Martin.
Thank you, Tatiana. Right, let's get stuck in, and we start with yet more bad news for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, because he's facing yet another by-election after former Tory MP Scott Benton resigned. Well, I'm joined in our Westminster studio now by our political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, another nightmare on Downing Street, and the timing couldn't be any worse.
Mayday, Mayday, I'm afraid, for Rishi Sunak, Martin. We're looking at probably the by-election in Blackpool South, held by Scott Benton of the Tory party in 2019, probably on May the 2nd, the same day as what will be a big local elections for Rishi Sunak and his future as maybe as Tory leader, because there are rumours of movements against him post those local elections if it goes the wrong way. This seat in Blackpool South held with a majority of just under 4,000 in 2019, but it had been a red seat, a Labour seat since 2002. Everyone is expecting to go back there. The big question is, how big will the swing be? Will it be enough to indicate how big possibly the majority will be for the Labour Party in the upcoming general election in November? And so we knew the by-election was coming, a recall petition. We expected it to be. There'd been a recall. But it was nailed on. And as you say, the Labour Party victory looks nailed on if all the metrics and the bookies' odds are to be followed. Unless something happens, because things happen in Rochester. We saw there with Azhar Ali. He was disowned as a candidate, wasn't he, by Keir Starmer over remarks he made post the 7th October attacks. Things happen in politics. It may not be nailed on, but right now it looks like it should be. And this, as you say, could be, in many ways, a bellwether of what's to come. It's all about the swing. This is a seat that went for the Brexit, it held its nose, went Conservative, get Brexit done, it backed Boris, delivering that 80-seat majority, that red wall tidal wave that changed politics. Now all seems to be flipping back to how it was before. Yes, indeed. And we're not sure what Reform will do. They probably will fight it. Who will their candidate be? But Blackpool South, really, looking at the polls, should be going back to Labour after that aberration in 2019 when it went blue. OK, well, I'm about to be joined by the Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, the political scientist and the absolute legend, Sir John Curtis. Sir John, fantastic timing to have you on, because this is the bread and butter that gets your juices flowing. Another by-election being called, and as you may have heard us there, Sir John, discussing all eyes on the margin, potentially, for the Labour Party to win. And the timing, the May Day timing on the same day as the council elections. Sir John, this is a by-election that will captivate the nation.
Well, yes and no. I mean, to be honest, I think my reaction to this news is it's actually rather good news for Rishi Sunak. It's probably better for him for the by-election to be held at the same time as local elections, which themselves are likely to be difficult, and therefore he gets all the bad news over in one go. Whereas if Scott Benton had insisted on sitting the whole process of a recall petition out, I think we'd be looking at the end of May, the beginning of June. So there would be another electoral test for the Prime Minister to face. Presumably what happened is Mr. Benton has been persuaded by one means or another to give up on the recall petition, and presumably the government whips will now move the writ for the by-election before the House rises later this week. So I think, to be honest, slightly good news to the government, given that this by-election did seem to be inevitable. But it's a much more difficult seat for the Conservatives to defend than seats like Tamworth and Selby and Mid-Bedfordshire, which they've already lost. It's only something like a 9% swing that's required. And to be honest, it won't therefore be that much of a surprise if the government loses. The question will be, as you say, whether or not the swing continues to be of the scale we've seen in some other by-elections, or whether it's somewhat less. But you now have to bear in mind, this will simply be reported alongside local elections, which could also be difficult for the government, but where perhaps one potential silver lining for the government is that it's looking as though Reform may not fight these elections on a very widespread basis. And if Reform are not on the ballot paper, presumably some of their supporters might in the end up backing the Conservatives in some of the local ballot boxes.
So John, is Chris Hope in the studio with Martin? There's been 12 by-elections since October 2022 when Rishi Sunak took over the Tory party. They've won 6 of them. Is that a good or a bad record for an incumbent party after 4 terms in office?
Oh, the problem for the government is that if you look at particularly the scale of the losses, the sizes of the swings against the government, both losses to the Liberal Democrats and losses to Labour. The last time you have to find, you can find a record that's as bad with swings against the government on the scale we have seen so consistently and regularly is the Parliament of 1992 to 1997, which of course ended rather badly for the government in John Major losing very badly. So, the truth is the by-elections have already, with the signal exception of Uxbridge, have been pointing consistently in the direction of the government losing, as do the opinion polls, as did the local elections last year. The reason why we're now looking at the beginning of May to see as to whether or not there's any sign of recovery for a government which, according to the opinion polls, is, if anything, even less popular now than it was when Liz Truss demitted office in the wake of her very disastrous fiscal event.
Indeed, Sir John, the opinion polls now show a huge and growing gap between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. With that in mind, how big a majority do you think we're looking at? I mean, like last week, Sir Geoffrey Cox was even saying that it could be 200 seats that the Labour Party gets as a majority. That would be an extraordinary margin. What would that mean for the democratic process moving forward? With little or no resistance or opposition, there could be a huge change of legislation with the Tory party just standing by and watching powerless.
Well, to be honest, it's been fairly clear for some time that the Conservative Party was potentially staring at its worst ever defeat in democratic politics. And that, yes, that's not necessarily good for Parliament because it will mean that we may have a inexperienced Labour government led by an inexperienced Labour Prime Minister who doesn't have a great deal in the way of opposition. It may well be an opposition that's spending more time arguing amongst itself than it is facing the government. And at the end of the day, good government relies in part on effective opposition. So while, of course, those who support the Labour Party would doubtless welcome a 200 majority, and maybe even Sir Keir Starmer would quite welcome it too. But to be honest, in the longer run, this is not necessarily a way of ensuring effective government administration.
Well, Sir John Curtis, it's always an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Look forward to much more of your company over what promises to be an absolutely tantalising general election. Thank you for joining us on GB News. Now to a stock warning that chilling levels of harassment are posing a serious threat to our democratic way of life. Dame Sara Khan, who's the government's independent social cohesion advisor, has published a damning report that found that more than 75% of the public feel that they have to refrain from speaking their mind. The report has just come out after the 3rd anniversary of the protests at the Batley Grammar School after a teacher showed a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad during a lesson. And that teacher, shamefully, is still in hiding. And as part of her review, Dame Sara is recommending the establishment of an exclusion zone for protests outside of schools. Well, I'm still joined by our political editor, Christopher Hope, and you spoke to Dame Sara earlier on, and I was very, very interested to find out about the motivation for this report was, at least in part, by her meeting with the Batley Grammar School teacher himself.
That's right. As you say, 3 years ago that happened, and that Batley Grammar School teacher is in hiding. She told me in the interview for GB News that it's impacted his family, his children. He suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder because of what happened to him. I asked her what help has there been from the council or the central government. Very little at all. Any compensation? None known. I think she's shone a light here on pressure on academics, council leaders, teachers, even journalists, from Islamists, from those on the right to the far right, putting pressure on people today. It chills down freedom of speech. But here's what she had particularly to say about the issue of teachers and whether other cases of teachers like in Batley Grammar School were affected.
I can tell you there have been lots of teachers who've experienced threats and abuse. I mean, I had many teachers contact me describing this level of fear that they have, and there's a new polling out recently that showed that teachers are very fearful about teaching some of these issues because they worry about the backlash that they're going to experience. The problem we have at the moment is that the Department for Education don't collect this level of data, so we don't actually know the full scale of it. I think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. When you speak to the NEU and other unions that deal with teachers, they have told me that this is a growing problem. So I think this is something we have to tackle. And, you know, let's be clear, this was somebody who was teaching a lesson that was part of the national curriculum, that was signed off by the local authority. And he was hounded out of his job and forced into hiding in our country in the 21st century. That is totally and utterly unacceptable in a free and democratic society like ours.
No, I've got to say, Chris, full kudos to Dame Sarah Khan for speaking up about this, for releasing a report. But a lot of people, I'll be speaking to a close friend of the teachers in the next hour, will say, why has it taken so long? The teacher was totally abandoned by his school, by his head teacher, by his union, by his local parliamentarians, by the entire system. I'm flabbergasted. It's grotesque to learn that no payment has been made, according to Dame Sarah. That simply staggers me, that we can so recklessly and willfully abandon somebody who basically did nothing wrong.
And Dame Sarah has met with the teacher, and as you say, PTSD showing signs of that. Yeah, I think this is a wake-up call. I think it's important this report was commissioned by Michael Gove in his Levelling Up and Communities Department, and it's vital we need to talk more about how conversation is being chilled down by pressure on social media elsewhere. Almost, do we need to have a conversation about what is being British and what do we expect to be allowed in our debate in society nowadays?
Of course, the big question is, Chris, there may be a new bill, but is there the will? I mean, outside the other week here, we saw those messages being projected onto Big Ben. Nothing was done about it. It's OK to bring in legislation which prevents mobs forming outside schools, but what happens when they do?
What she wants is 150 metres from a school, so you can't protest at the school gate, as you saw in some of these examples on the film there, but further away, so you can't put pressure on teachers and feel the pressure on these teachers. They try and teach what's in the national curriculum. As Dame Sarah said this then, the images there of the Prophet Muhammad were the idea of have a conversation about blasphemy was actually in the teaching materials that the teachers were given.
Yeah, there was specific teaching aid to have a conversation about blasphemy because in the past it had specifically caused a reaction. It had been done before. It wasn't the first time the same teacher even shown those images in the same school. The big question is, has this got any teeth?
Well, certainly Dame Sarah would hope it has. She said there's a tip of the iceberg. She wants a new unit to be established dealing with these issues, a social resilience cohesion unit to help support and almost support people in authority in councils, academics, journalism, to ensure they can know how far they can go and not risk being chilled down by threats.
OK, well, hats off. At least the report is out. And now let's see what's done with it next. Chris Hope, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. Now, after farmers' protests across continental Europe and even Wales, today the fight is being taken right to the heart of the British government. The farmers are gathering in London right now and heading towards the Houses of Parliament round the corner from us as they pursue better protections for their struggling sector. Well, let's whiz now straight across to Westminster and speak to our national reporter, Theo Chikomba. Theo, what's the latest on the ground?
Yeah, well, we're expecting dozens of farmers to come here to Parliament Square in the next hour or so. We've seen an image of dozens of them arriving from Kent, and they'll be coming into central London. Some of them are in London already. We've come over from southwest London to here, and already there's just a handful of people who are here handing out these flyers, and they are saying that food shortages will follow and farming will change forever if no action is taken. And before we came to this location, we spoke to some of those who work in the farming industry, and this is what they had to say.
I'm here today because as a British farmer, I used to sell to supermarkets and I used to get paid £1.14 an hour. for the work I did, and I just don't think that's acceptable. 25% of British farmers are living below the poverty line, and when we're working 6-7 days a week, every week of the year, I just don't think that should ever be a statistic that exists, basically. I think we need more education in the system to the British public. They need to understand that there is a difference between buying British food and buying food from another country, which has potentially got lower welfare standards, lower environmental standards, and is just not quite so good for public health.
We're here today, there's 3 main reasons. One is to ban substantial imports. 2 is packaging. So a lot of supermarkets are bringing meat and vegetables into the UK, but packaging them as British meat and vegetables when they're not even grown or from the UK. And then 3, it's just, there's a lot of things that are going on at the minute that are just not, you know, mental health in farming has gone down a lot because of lack of support in farming. We're losing funding. There's a lot of things in farming that are going wrong because the government are taking a lot of support away.
Well, the Farming Minister, Mark Spencer, says we do prioritise British farming, and any deal that we do look to do for the future will be prioritising those here in Britain. But for those farmers who will be coming here into central London, they'll certainly be hoping to drive the message that British farming is important and it does need to be protected.
Thank you, Theo Chicomba, live from the Farmers' Protest. Let's hope that Jeremy Clarkson rolls in on his Lamborghini, hopefully doing a wheelie. That will certainly get the eyeballs ticking. Thank you, Theo Chicomba, for joining us. Of course, we'll have that throughout the show as it builds up. Now, time is ticking on your chance to win great garden gadgets, a shopping spree, and 12,345 quid, £1,2,345, tax-free. Lines close this Friday, so make sure you get weaving now. Here's the details you need to get your mitts on the moolah.
Want to be a winner just like Phil?
Obviously, whoever wins it next is going to be as happy as I was, and they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
Enter our massive spring giveaway. There's £12,345 in tax-free cash to give your finances a spring boost. We'll also send you on a shopping spree with £500 worth of vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. You'll also get a garden gadget package. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats, and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Lines closed Good Friday. What an Easter gift that could be. Now, the government is facing calls to overhaul murder laws in the wake of the Nottingham attacks. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
Men's mental health. Men are starting to talk a lot more. You've been through a lot of stuff that people don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, the last few years for me have been very, very difficult. People see me on tour, performing, making music, but myself and my wife, we went through 2 miscarriages. For us, that was a very devastating time and very difficult to know how to kind of process those emotions. And I guess as a man, I did the thing of bottling up my emotions, and where I feel comfortable to be able to express myself is in the studio, whereas, she had obviously a different reaction to, what happened to us, because not only was it happening to her mentally, psychologically, but it was happening to her physically as well. And I think something that she really wanted to see from me was that sensitivity and that emotion. And I thought that as a man, being strong was trying to bottle up my emotions and just show her that, that I'm being strong for her. But actually being strong is talking about it. And what's happened ever since I've started to talk about it is I've spoken to more men that have experienced baby loss. My wife forced out of me, you know, how do you feel? And I ended up as a mess on the floor. I was exasperating, crying, almost inconsolable. She was just holding me in her arms as we cried together, and we cried together. And I didn't realise I needed that release so badly. Like I said, I've been able to speak to other men, and we've been able to cry together, and they shared their own experiences, which they did similar to me. But actually, you know, as men, I feel like that conversation and that sensitivity and being able to be emotional together.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The time is 4:27. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Later this hour, I'll have the latest on another huge day for Donald Trump, who's been in court yet again. But before that, the government is facing calls to overhaul murder laws in the wake of the Nottingham attacks. A watchdog has found prosecutors correctly charged triple killer Valdo Colocane, but should have handled the case better. Colocane killed Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates last June. He admitted manslaughter by diminished responsibility, and prosecutors decided not to pursue murder charges against him. Well, GB News' East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has covered this story since that dreadful day, and he joins me now from down the line in Paddington. Will, the recommendations made today put forward a different type of justice in the future as opposed to what happened to Colocane. What are the recommendations that came out today?
Yes, well, the impact of this case has been felt not just in Nottingham but across the country, particularly because of the horrific nature of Colocane's crime. But it has continued as a story after the sentencing because of the sentencing and the acceptance under the grounds of diminished responsibility. Now, diminished responsibility essentially means because of Colocane's mental state, suffering with schizophrenia, that he's not entirely answerable to the severity of his crimes. So that's why the Crown Prosecution Service accepted in January at Nottingham Crown Court that Colocane could submit pleas of manslaughter rather than murder, meaning that there was no criminal trial in January. And that decision received a lot of criticism, which is ultimately why this report was commissioned by Victoria Prentice, the Attorney General. Now, what has come out in the report today from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Crown Prosecution Services, which is an independent service, is that the decision was correct, but there are recommendations. Now, those recommendations are around whether the government could change the law around homicide. So rather than there being one simple definition, a 3-tiered system, a first degree, a second degree under diminished responsibility, and then thirdly, manslaughter. Now, the second main recommendation is how the CPS works with families, whether instead of saying that they can consult with families, which basically means a discussion, whether they should have better wording around informing of decisions. This really upset the families, particularly because they expected to see a murder trial for Valdo Colocane, the killer of those 2 students, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber, but as well as school caretaker Ian Coates, who was just a few months away from retirement. Now, from the Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Parkinson, he says that the CPS has to work professionally, but he is going to consider what has been said today. The families, of course, they say that they don't accept this, and only when there is a change in the law can there be true justice, because right now, with the pleas as the way they are, they say that murderers are getting away with murder.
OK, Will Hollis, thanks for that update. And Barnaby's mother, Emma, said true justice had not been served. It was a trial by doctors, and that manslaughter finding was put forward as a fait accompli. They do not feel justice was served. By the way, the same recommendations made today here were made in 2006 at the Law Commission, and nothing has been done since. When will that law finally get changed? There's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, and I'll bring you more updates from the landmark farmers' protest that's rolling into London. They're due to demonstrate outside Parliament in around about an hour's time. We'll be there live on scene. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. The top stories this hour. The Chinese ambassador has been summoned to the UK Foreign Office. It comes after the government said hackers affiliated to the Chinese state were responsible for 2 malicious cyber campaigns on the Electoral Commission and parliamentarians. 2 individuals have been sanctioned by the government, named as security official Zhao Guangzhong and Ni Gaobin. Speaking in the Commons, Oliver Dowden says the government want to be as open as possible with the British public concerning the attack. He's also ensured national cybersecurity support services will be helping political parties ensure they're protected from foreign influence in the run-up to the general election. Rishi Sunak is facing another by-election in a red wall seat after Scott Benton resigned as an MP. The Blackpool South MP was already facing a recall petition. Benton, who's now an independent, was found to have broken Commons rules when he was caught by the Times newspaper offering to act on behalf of gambling investors. An independent panel upheld a decision by the Standards Committee, which Mr Benton had appealed against. Donald Trump has won a bid to pause his £360 million civil fraud judgment if he posts a £140 million bond within 10 days. It's a victory for the former US president that blocks New York state authorities from beginning to seize his assets immediately. He'd been facing a deadline today to post bond for the fine, which he was given inflating his net worth. If he did not meet the deadline, he could have faced having his assets such as Trump Tower or his plane Trump Force One seized. Former ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an initial bid to challenge the removal of her British citizenship at the Supreme Court. Last year, Ms Begum lost her first appeal against the decision to revoke her citizenship on national security grounds at the Special Immigration Appeals Commission. It's after she was found in a Syrian refugee camp following her travel to the country as a 15-year-old in 2015 to join the so-called Islamic State terror group. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now, coming up, a warning over China from MPs who say the communist country has carried out cyber attacks in Britain. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Yeah, well, when it comes to fish and chips, we all know they're a part of a British tradition, and the Golden Chippy is an award-winning restaurant, and for years they've been serving the community here in Greenwich, and even today on a Sunday they are fully packed today. But this is the issue. Here we've got a mural and which says a great British meal. Residents who live in this area who've complained to Greenwich Council, who say it's inappropriate considering it's in a conservation area. Here's what some of the local people we've been speaking to had to say.
What's wrong with it? It looks all right, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Look at some of the other graffiti they've got around in Greenwich. They don't want to take that down, do they? But when you've got something like this, it's half decent, they want to remove it.
Fantastic artwork. I really like it. Reminds me of Banksy.
Well, those are the views here from people who live in this local area. But I'm kindly joined by Chris, the owner. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. You've been here for 20 years now. Tell me how this issue has come up.
They take pictures. It's only been up for about a month, and it's been very, very popular. I don't want to believe that any of the locals are complaining that this is too loud or anything like that. They say it needs planning permission. How a little thing like this needs planning permission, I don't know.
Are you working with an artist in this local area?
I've got a local guy that does murals, so he said, would you like me to do something for you? I said, yes, why not? I said, make sure you leave a bit of space for people to stand there so they can take some selfies or pictures or whatever they want to do from Golden Chippy. And it's been extremely popular, and not one person has come to me and said, that looks terrible. So I cannot imagine the person that complained about this. I think it's just cancelled.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. 4:36 is your time. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, later in the show, as the countdown continues to the Easter weekend, I'll ask whether it's going to be a complete and utter washout. I think you can guess what the answer's going to be. Now, addressing MPs in the past hour, Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden has said that China was behind a cyber attack in 2021 that accessed the personal details of around 40 million British voters, an accusation that Beijing says is baseless and a smear. Well, Oliver Dowden also told the House of Commons that whilst the UK's institutions had not been harmed by the attacks, the cyber threat from China is, quote, real and serious, that the government was sanctioning Chinese individuals in response. Well, I'm joined now by our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, for a full update. Mark, Oliver Dowden issuing strong words. Didn't seem that there was any actual impact, but nevertheless, shots fired that Britain is taking action and this cannot be allowed to continue.
Yeah, I think a lot of the MPs in the Commons might disagree with the interpretation of this being strong anything. The consensus from a lot of the MPs is that it? Clearly, it had been briefed out in the newspapers the night before that the government was going to get tough on China, but one MP said the response of the government was like heading to a gunfight with a wooden spoon. We had the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, saying that it was clear that the actions of China put it in the realms of a hostile state, and as such, China should be added to the register of hostile states. Instead, we've got the Chinese ambassador being summoned to the Foreign Office some 3 years after these events took place. This is what the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, told the Commons a short time ago.
We want now to be as open as possible with the House and with the British public, because part of our defence is calling out this behaviour. This is the latest in a clear pattern of hostile activity originating in China, including the targeting of democratic institutions and parliamentarians in the United Kingdom and beyond.
And some of the real criticism of the government here is the sanctions against China. No senior member of the Chinese Communist Party has been sanctioned. 2 officials have been. A small company of about 50 employees has been sanctioned, and that seems to be it, apart from, as I say, the ambassador being summoned to the Foreign Office to answer these accusations. We heard from one of those who was a target of the Chinese cyber attacks, the former Conservative Party leader, Sir Ian Duncan Smith. Now, he has described the government's action as an elephant giving birth to a mouse. He said, though, that he would not be intimidated by the actions of the Chinese state. This is what he said.
Neither we nor other parliamentary colleagues will be bullied into silence by Beijing. For years, the behaviour of the Chinese government has gone unchecked, and we have been too passive here in the West, particularly here in the UK, as Beijing overseas influence operations have rapidly expanded, turning a blind eye to what the Intelligence and Security Committee termed penetration of every sector of the UK economy, unquote. Still, incredibly, there is a debate within the UK government, we understand, over whether or not China should be in the enhanced tier of the new foreign influence registration scheme.
Well, the Chinese government is clearly on notice now, but there's no indication that this kind of activity is diminishing in any way. In fact, just in recent days, some real concern about Russia and China passing on disinformation about the Princess of Wales, given the medical condition that she has been faced with as well. And it's not just, of course, China and Russia, but we know Iran, North Korea and others are fully involved in this grey zone warfare at the moment.
OK, Mark White, superb. Like an elephant giving birth to a mouse, like taking a wooden spoon to a gunfight. Mark White, superb metaphors and a great roundup. Thanks for joining us on GB News this afternoon. OK, moving on now. For reaction to this story, I'm joined in our studio by Charles Parton, who spent 22 years of his 37-year diplomatic career working in or on China, Hong Kong and Taiwan. So you know a thing or two about the Chinese modus operandi. Oliver Dowden giving words in Parliament today. Mark White saying they were fangless, didn't really do anything. But he did set out that there was no real threat or impact onto our elections, our democratic systems. Nothing has really happened. So is all this really much ado about nothing?
No, I don't think it is actually an elephant giving birth to a mouse, to be frank. I mean, this is just one of very many number of Chinese attacks on a whole range of things. So will this particular attack bring UK democracy to its knees? No, it won't. But they are collecting a lot of information on a lot of people in order to get together more targeted attacks on certain people. So that's one thing. And the second thing, I don't think we should dismiss them in terms of interference in elections. Immediately comes to mind is two incidents in a Canada general election, I think it was in 2021, when they mobilised support for the candidate against what they considered to be an anti-Chinese candidate. And the Chinese Consul General in Vancouver went around boasting that she had managed to unseat these two MPs by getting people to actually cast the vote. So in this particular case, if you can find, let's say, in a particular constituency in the UK where there might be a very close vote, I mean, we've had times when it's been a handful, but it might be 100 or so. If you can find, for instance, from the Chinese diaspora, people who've immigrated from Beijing and Shanghai to the UK, get them out to vote and vote against Mr. Ian Duncan Smith or whoever it is that might be on a knife edge, you could unseat someone.
So that's a very clear threat then, Joel. It's targeting marginal seats, finding the candidates who've been outspoken about their dislike or chagrin towards Beijing, mobilising Chinese people or friends of on the ground, and actually turning them out to vote to get people unseated. That becomes a real threat rather than this kind of ephemeral threat.
Well, it could be, and it would also be easier in a local election where you've got small wards with greater concentrations of people that you could actually, and fewer votes, so that you could manufacture the result you want. I mean, the other point is that a number of MPs were being targeted separately, no doubt to find a certain amount of dirt on them, which could then be fed either into disinformation or ways of discrediting them with the public, as another way of possibly ensuring that they don't get re-election. So I think it is serious. And then the other thought that comes to my mind is that if you're a minister, let's say, or a politician with a fairly slim majority in Parliament, are you going to be pushing policies that you think might offend the Chinese Communist Party if you think it's then going to mobilise people in your constituency to vote against you at the next election and make you lose your job? I mean, these are smallish chances, but clearly the Chinese think it's worth hacking these databases. I mean, they're not wasting their time and effort and money for no reason. So I think Mr. Dowden and the government belatedly was absolutely right to call these things out. You're not going to stop them, but the more publicity and adverse publicity against China, and the more we work with our allies who've suffered many of the same things, including the most famous one some years ago of the Americans, where their Office of Personnel Management, all the records of their civil servants, was stripped bare by the Chinese. And that had a lot of personal and financial and other information in. So, yes, we should definitely be keeping our defences up.
OK, superb. Very fascinating stuff, Charles Parton. Spent 22 years of your 37-year diplomatic career working in or around China. Fascinating stuff. Now, there's been double trouble for Donald Trump today in the courts. He's given his response to both cases following a short hearing. We'll have all the details and the analysis of that. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The rest of this week promises more rain, some pretty heavy showers around, staying generally on the cool sides, but there'll be some brighter spells. As you might imagine, with that kind of weather forecast, it's low pressure that's controlling our weather situation and will continue to do so through this week. Wet weather moving across Scotland, quite a bit of snow over some of the hills here, and a strong and cold wind blowing to the east. May turn a little drier in places across England and Wales through the night, but further rain likely to affect parts of the south of Northern Ireland and wintry showers in the far north. Temperatures dropping down into single figures, may not be far off freezing to start the day in parts of Scotland. The snowy weather should ease over the mountains through the course of tomorrow, but still staying pretty showery on the Moray Firth and the east coast of Scotland, and feeling pretty chilly here too. After a largely dry start, we'll see more rain then coming into parts of England and Wales. A wetter day in the southeast, rain spreading into the Midlands and across Northern Ireland, but something a bit brighter for South Wales and southwest England, and some sunny spells for eastern England too. But still, for most of us, temperatures only around about average or below in Scotland, where the wet weather will continue into Wednesday, and then we're looking at bands of showers coming in from the west. So some brighter spells in between, bit of sunshine here and there, but you'll always be dodging the downpours through Wednesday, and indeed for the rest of this week and in the run-up to Easter.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive?
Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:49. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now, at 5 o'clock, I'll have the latest on the farmers' protests that are happening right now outside the Houses of Parliament just over the way. But before that, Donald Trump has had his $464 million fine reduced to a mere $175 million and has been given an additional 10 days to cough up. While stopping outside the court, he addressed the legal cases against him and called the judge's reputation into question. Now, a warning that this clip does have flashing images.
This is a case that could have been brought 3.5 years ago. And now they're fighting over days because they want to try and do it during the election. This is election interference. That's all it is. Election interference. And it's a disgrace. We'll obviously be appealing. But this is a pure case of voter intimidation and election interference. And it shouldn't be allowed to happen. This case could have been brought by and then they bring it anyway. As you know, D.A. Bragg did not want to bring this case. He was forced into it for outside reasons, and it's a disgrace that it can happen. But this was a case that had been brought 3.5 years ago, and they decide to wait now, just during the election, so that I won't be able to campaign. We'll be appealing this. On the other decision, it will be my honor to post, and we'll post whatever is necessary, whether it be cash or securities or bonds. There's a decision. We appreciate and respect the appellate division very much, and we will, I think, do very well in that whole thing. We have a judge who I believe is a crooked judge and a crooked attorney general, absolutely crooked. We did nothing wrong at all, 100%, and that was proven, and everybody there said it was proven. All you have to do is read the legal scholars, and you see that it was proven. But we will continue with that, but we appreciate very much the decision of the appellate division. Thank you very much.
Well, that's Donald Trump as rambunctious as ever, and I'm joined in the studio now in Westminster by Jennifer Ewing from Republicans Overseas UK. Welcome to Westminster. So, astronomical sums of money, but in layman's terms, what did it mean? Donald Trump had to post $175 million today so he could keep his liberty?
Okay, so basically this, and it's all getting very complicated, this lawfare, but the main thing to know is he's appealing this case, which is the real estate case, where they think he misvalued some of his property, right? So it's an egregious case to begin with, but he wanted to appeal that. In order to appeal that, he had to put a bond down. They wanted him to put $464 million. Now, usually you'd be able to put real estate up against that, or sometimes stocks, or something like that. But they were insisting on cash. Well, nobody, even Donald Trump, keeps that kind of cash around. So they appealed the size of the bail, and today, just an hour ago, 90 minutes ago, we've heard that the bail has been reduced to $175 million, and he has 10 days to pay that. And we suspect he will have that cash. He will be able to do that.
And then the Trump train will roll on. The big question, I guess, Jennifer, is any of this affecting Donald Trump's polling, or is it helping?
It's surprisingly helping, although I don't think it should be a surprise anymore. If we go back to May of last year, Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump were neck and neck. And then all of a sudden, these indictments, the various four indictments started coming up. And with each one, Trump's numbers went up, right? So people do not care about this. They know that Donald Trump, especially in this case, has been one of the most well-known real estate moguls in New York City for half a century. Nothing like this has ever been brought up. He ran for president, as we know. Nothing like it was brought up during his presidency. And so now when he decides to run again, this is coming out. And he's not wrong. The Attorney General, she ran on getting Trump. It was, here's the man, let me find the crime. So people, even people who don't like him, Frank Luntz, who's a very famous pollster, does not like Trump, and he came out over the weekend and basically said, if these people continue with all of these, this lawfare, Donald Trump will win.
Yeah, well, maybe that's where we're at. Thank you very much, for joining us. Jennifer Ewing, thank you very much, spokesperson from Republicans Overseas UK. And it's also worth bearing in mind that Donald Trump could float Truth Social. That's a platform he owns, apparently worth $3 billion. And if that goes through, he'll have no trouble whatsoever making $175 million bail. It's an astonishing thing to get your head around, those of Brit. These numbers, $500 million just to keep your liberty. Now, almost 3 years to the day since protests happened outside Batley Grammar School, the laws have been changed preventing such gatherings happening again. Will it be enough? Is it too little, too late? Full discussion after this. I'm Martin Daubney on Britain's News Channel. But here's your weather with Alex Deakin.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The rest of this week promises more rain, some pretty heavy showers around, staying generally on the cool sides, but there'll be some brighter spells. As you might imagine, with that kind of weather forecast, it's low pressure that's controlling our weather situation and will continue to do so through this week. Wet weather moving across Scotland, quite a bit of snow over some of the hills here, and a strong and cold wind blowing to the east. Made it a little drier in places across England and Wales through the night, but further rain likely to affect parts of the south of Northern Ireland and wintry showers in the far north. Temperatures dropping down into single figures, may not be far off freezing to start the day in parts of Scotland. The snowy weather should ease over the mountains through the course of tomorrow, but still staying pretty showery on the Moray Firth and the east coast of Scotland, and feeling pretty chilly here too. After a largely dry start, we'll see more rain then coming into parts of England and Wales. A wetter day in the southeast, rain spreading into the Midlands and across Northern Ireland, but something a bit brighter for South Wales and southwest England, and some sunny spells for eastern England too. But still, for most of us, temperatures only around about average or below in Scotland, where the wet weather will continue into Wednesday, and then we're looking at bands of showers coming in from the west. So some brighter spells in between, bit of sunshine here and there, but you'll always be dodging the downpours through Wednesday, and indeed for the rest of this week and in the run-up to Easter.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you could win big. You could win an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash that you could spend however you like. Plus, there's a further £500 of shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. We'll also give you a gadget package to use in your garden this spring. That includes a games console, a pizza oven and a portable smart speaker, so you can listen to GB News on the go. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and a very happy Monday to you. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Coming up, there's yet more bad news for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak today. He's facing yet another by-election after former Tory MP Scott Benton has resigned. After that, banned protests outside schools. One conclusion from a damning report which says they're a form of extremism threatening Britain's democratic way of life. 3 years on from the Batley grammar school teacher being forced into hiding. And British farmers are taking their anger right to the heart of government. They've begun to descend on Westminster right outside the studio. We'll have all the latest from the front line as the slurry flies. That's all coming now between now and 6 o'clock. So a damning report released today by Dame Sarah Khan has concluded that people don't feel able to speak their mind in the wake of Islamist threats, particularly at schools. People are keeping quiet, self-censoring. Is there any wonder? 3 years ago on Friday was the date the Batley grammar school teacher was forced into hiding by the mob. Death threats issued to him, abandoned by his school, abandoned by his head teacher, by his union and by his local member of parliament. Nobody stuck up for him. He was forced out of a livelihood, forced out of the job he adored, to this day living in fear. And we found out earlier on today that Dame Sarah met with the teacher and was moved by his plight, told us he's suffering from PTSD and has received no compensation. This cannot be right in modern Britain. Let me know your thoughts on this. gbviews@gbnews.com. Have we completely lost the plot? Do we not stick up for our own people anymore? And this cannot be allowed to continue. But before that, it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom today is that the Chinese ambassador has been summoned to the Foreign Office. It comes after the government said hackers affiliated to the Chinese state were responsible for 2 malicious cyber campaigns on the Electoral Commission and parliamentarians. 2 individuals, we understand, have been sanctioned by the government, named as security officials Zhao Guangzong and Ni Gaobin. Speaking in the Commons, Oliver Dowden says the government wants to be as open as possible with the British public concerning the attack. He's also ensured national cybersecurity support services will be helping political parties make sure they're protected from foreign influence in the run-up to the general election.
We want now to be as open as possible with the House and with the British public, because part of our defence is calling out this behaviour. This is the latest in a clear pattern of hostile activity originating in China, including the targeting of democratic institutions and parliamentarians in the United Kingdom and beyond.
The Deputy Prime Minister speaking a short time ago. Well, Rishi Sunak is facing another by-election in a red wall seat after Scott Benton resigned as an MP. The Blackpool South MP was already facing a recall petition. Mr Benton, who's now an independent, was found to have broken Commons rules when he was caught out by the Times newspaper offering to act on behalf of gambling investors. An independent panel upheld a decision by the Standards Committee, which Mr Benton had appealed against.
He should have done it much sooner, frankly, and the Tory party should have made him resign much sooner. I mean, it's absolutely chaos, isn't it, in the Tory party today? A divided party, divided from top to bottom, and weak leadership under Rishi Sunak. We need this by-election now as soon as possible. The Tories should move the writ, and let's get on and let's elect a Labour MP who can represent the people of Blackpool here in the House of Commons.
The Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth speaking there. Now, the former ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an initial bid to challenge the removal of her British citizenship at the Supreme Court. Last year, Miss Begum lost her first appeal against the decision to revoke her citizenship on national security grounds at the National Special Immigration Appeals Commission. It's after she was found in a Syrian refugee camp following her travel to the country as a 15-year-old in 2015 to join so-called Islamic State. Now, as you've been hearing, Donald Trump has won a bid to pause his £360 million civil fraud judgment if he posts a £140 million bond within 10 days. And a warning, the following footage does contain flashing imagery. Well, it is a victory for the former US president that blocks New York state authorities now from beginning to seize his assets immediately. He had been facing a deadline today to post bond for the fine which he was given for inflating, they said, his own net worth. If he didn't meet the deadline, he could have faced having his assets, such as Trump Tower or his aeroplane, Trump Force One, seized. But speaking outside court today, Mr Trump reacted to his bond being reduced in the New York civil fraud trial. Here's what he said.
It is being battered by his decision. So I greatly respect the decision of the appellate division, and I'll post either $175 billion in cash or bonds or security or whatever is necessary very quickly within the 10 days. And I thank the appellate division for acting quickly. But Judge Engoron is a disgrace to this country, and this should not be allowed to happen.
Donald Trump speaking a short time ago. Now, the Crown Prosecution Service has been cleared of wrongdoing in accepting the plea of triple killer Valdo Kalakane without going to trial, a new report says. Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber, along with school caretaker Ian Coates, were killed in June last year in a spate of attacks in Nottingham while Kalakane was suffering from schizophrenia. He was sentenced to a hospital order instead of being sent to prison. His Majesty's Crown Prosecution Inspectorate said the correct decision was made in accepting manslaughter pleas on the grounds of diminished responsibility. 2 men have been found guilty of murdering a footballer on the dance floor of a nightclub on Boxing Day. 23-year-old Cody Fisher was killed shortly before midnight by a masked group at the Crane Club in Birmingham in 2022. Police have released CCTV footage of the night Cody was stabbed to death. 23-year-old Remy Gordon and 22-year-old Cammy Carpenter were convicted today. A third defendant, 19-year-old Regan Anderson, was found not guilty of murder. Now, a review led by independent government advisor Dame Sarah Khan has been published pointing to chilling levels of harassment posing a serious threat to schools. It found more than 75% of the public feel they can't speak their mind, and 27% have employed security or moved jobs or house. As part of her review, Dame Sarah is recommending the establishment of an exclusion zone for protests outside schools. Those are your latest top stories. If you'd like more details, sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan that QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, we start this hour with yet more bad news for the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, because he's facing yet another by-election after this time former Tory MP Scott Benton resigned. And let's hear Labour's response.
Well, we've got an excellent candidate in Chris Webb. He's from Blackpool. He's born and bred in Blackpool, and he's working very hard to win the trust of the people of Blackpool, but we take nothing for granted. We know that the people of Blackpool, they put their trust in the Tory party 4 years ago. The Tory party let them down. It's broken every promise, has failed to fix the NHS. Living standards in Blackpool have been squeezed. But we know that we've got to work hard to win the trust of the people in Blackpool, and that's what we're going to be doing.
Well, I'm joined now in the studio by our political editor, Chris of Hope. Chris, so another nightmare on Downing Street, and this time, of course, the timing on the same day as those local elections in May.
We expect it to be the by-election date be set by the government. The government's probably keen, as John Curtis told us an hour ago, to get all the bad news out of the way early on the same day, which is the same day as the local election campaigns in England and Wales, which will be a real difficult moment, I think, for Rishi Sunak. May Day for number 10 Downing Street. But they've lost 6 out of the 12 past by-elections since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister in October 2022. We expect to lose a 13th or the 7th or the 13th here. It's a majority just under 4,000 held by Scott Benton. That seat was been a Labour seat since 2002, went blue in 2019 with the Boris Johnson landslide. That'll be reversed.
And I guess all eyes are going to be on the nature of the swing, the nature of the margin, and will this be the canary in the mine for the forthcoming general election?
We keep saying it, don't we? Will it be the big swing which forces Tory MP to move against Rishi Sunak? I think last week you might have said yes, maybe. It feels less so now, I think, as we get nearer towards when the election will be in November. One rebel told me late last week that it's like Rishi Sunak's authority is like a sandcastle. It gets sort of a wave comes in and sort of goes over and retreats, and he's still there, but in a different shape, and it kind of eats into it as the waves keep lapping. And another big wave will be these local elections, plus this by-election.
Well, a lot of sandcastles in Blackpool, of course.
Yes,
and they'll be washed away by a tide. Why don't we go now to Matt Goodwin, the political commentator and pollster who likes to sink his fangs into things like this. Matt, welcome to the show. He's not there. Let's carry on for a minute until we get Matt Goodwin. The point being, Matt Goodwin has just done an excellent... Matt, are you there? Matt Goodwin has just done an excellent piece about the return of Nigel Farage. Now, Matt Goodwin, as we understand it, Reform won't be standing in this election, but nevertheless, all eyes will be on this by-election because of the small majority of less than 4,000. And will it be the bellwether of what's to come? This was a classic red wall seat that went Tory to get Brexit done in 2019. Historically, very Labour, looks set to return that way. Will this be an ominous bellwether, Matt?
Well, I think it's going to be another difficult moment for Rishi Sunak. If you look at the national polls, Martin, the Conservatives this week with YouGov down to 19%. That's only 4 points ahead of the Reform Party. There does not appear to be a flaw in the Conservative Party vote. That's what would be concerning me in number 10. I mean, this vote is spiralling downwards. And I've been speaking to MPs in recent days who are saying, actually, how low can this vote go? So if this is going to be another humiliating by-election defeat for Rishi Sunak, I suspect, that... I think, as Christopher Hope was just saying, I think there are different views in Parliament. I think you speak to some Conservative MPs and they say, let's let Rishi Sunak soak up a very heavy election defeat, which allows the party to draw a line under it and move on. But then, there are lots of other self-interested Conservative MPs, Martin, who are saying, well, hang on a minute. I'm going to lose my seat, and I might not lose my seat if maybe we take a punt on somebody else ahead of the next election. So this is all coming into play. But to be frank, I've never seen the Conservative Party vote this week since maybe the spring of 2019, when, of course, they had Boris Johnson waiting in the wings, and there's no Boris Johnson this time around.
And Matt Goodwin, you have an excellent Substack and you've written a piece today. What if Nigel stands? Of course, that's the massive question. And with this polling, as you say, spiralling downwards for the Conservatives, if Nigel Farage stepped into play, all bets would be off. Matt, tell us about some of the analysis you've done of target seats and areas and the regional discrepancies, the demographic discrepancies of this Reform resurgence.
Yeah, well, this is actually one of the most read pieces I've written on the Substack, and I think that's because I think people can sense that something's going on out there in the country. Look, if Nigel Farage were to announce that he was returning to frontline politics, we know from the polling, from YouGov and others, he would add somewhere between 3 and 4 points to the Reform vote. So let's assume that perhaps Reform would end up drawing level with the Conservatives, like the Brexit Party did, of course, in 2019, and then Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party ended up replacing the Conservatives in the opinion polls. So look, whatever he does is going to be big news. Now, if you look at the Reform vote, they're strongest in those working class, older constituencies along the east coast of England, round into Essex and Kent. They're also likely to do well in some of those red wall seats. And most of their support is coming from those disillusioned 2019 Conservatives. In fact, look, what would worry me if I were in number 10 advising Rishi Sunak, firstly, is we've had that devastating poll this week that shows that Farage is more popular among 2019 Conservatives than Rishi Sunak. But we've also seen the fact that more than 1/3 of Boris Johnson's voters from 2019 are now saying they're going to vote for the Reform Party. And remember, Martin, this is still a party that doesn't actually have much name recognition out there in the country. I still meet people in focus groups all the time who say, well, what is Reform? You know, who's leading it? What's this about? So these numbers are high, given that the party hasn't yet, I would argue, fully cut through into the national psyche. You and I talk about politics all the time. The people watching this show know a lot about politics, but most people out there who are very busy and not kind of dwelling on SW1 still might not know what this party is. So I actually think its ceiling is probably a bit higher than the 15% that we've seen this week. I suspect with Nigel Farage, with a bit of money, with a bit of investment, I suspect Reform could probably start inching up to where the Brexit Party was, which was about 20% in the national polls, 20 to 22%. And that, of course, you know, is another nail in the coffin for Rishi Sunak. I mean, there's no way back at the next election if he's losing 1/3 of his vote to the Reform Party. That's it, end of days.
Super stuff. Matt Goodwin, political commentator and pollster, excellent as ever. It's worth remembering, of course, that even with 22%, the Brexit Party didn't win a single seat. And I know that because I was one of those candidates. I stood in Ashfield against that man, Lee Anderson. But look, I said on just there that I don't think the Reform Party are standing. You've got news that's not the case.
They are standing, yeah. I've been texting people, but while Matt Goodwin was speaking there, Mark Butcher is the candidate for the Reform Party, a local chap, according to Richard Tice, the party leader, very involved in working in the charity sector and the homeless. Labour have found their candidate. You heard Jonathan Ashworth there mentioning him on air. So wait to see who the Tories will stand to try and hold on to this seat. But it looks like a very uphill task already.
And of course, the Labour Party saying they've gone for a local lad. There'll be a lot of that going on, a local lad to try and get the vote over the line, and it's going to be all to play for.
Yeah, it will be. It really will be. I mean, I think it'll be full of symbolism. I think tyres going in, tyres going out. You already alluded to them with we talked about Sandcastle. I think it's going to be a big moment, I think, for the Labour Party. How big can their swing be?
If you stick around, please, but we have to go now to the farmers' protests, because across continental Europe and even Wales today, the fight is being taken right to the heart of the British government. Farmers are gathering in London right now and heading towards the Houses of Parliament as they pursue better protections for their struggling sector. And let's cross right now to Westminster and speak to our national reporter, Theo Chikomba. Theo, what's the latest on the ground?
Well, farmers here are saying that food shortages are on the way and farming will change if no action is taken. We understand that dozens of tractors with farmers on them, obviously, are on their way here to Parliament Square. We've seen images of them on their way here and we'll be hopefully speaking to them shortly when they arrive. But I'm kindly joined by Michelle, who's joining the protest this afternoon. So tell me why you're here and what is the message you're hoping the government can hear today?
Yeah, I'm just a member of the public, so I've got no family in farming or anything like that. But we're here to support the farmers because basically no farmers, no food. And we're against synthetic food, and we need our farmers. They, you know, everything leads back to climate, shall we say, if you look further into it. And we just need to support them. The public need to support farming, British farming. The whole of Europe are protesting. All the farmers are protesting across Europe. So now it's the time for the British farmers to get in on the act, basically.
We've spoken to some farmers today who've travelled from places like Lincolnshire and Lancashire and those kind of places, and they're saying the quality of food is something that needs to be addressed. Do you agree with that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at, you need to support your local farm shops and things like that, or your local butchers. And if you look at the quality of supermarket meat to as I say, a farm shop, the quality is totally different. And as I say, and if the government want us to, or the public to eat synthetic food, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen.
Of course, we also have local producers, some of those who are coming here today, and they're arguing that the government is focusing on subsidies which are focusing and encouraging them to look after wildlife rather than food production. Is that also an issue you've been hearing about?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, everything is linked some way along the line, and we do need to support them, and the British public need to get behind our farming industry and our fishing industries. We're an island, and we need to be self-sufficient.
Michelle, thank you so much for your time. Now, we are expecting lots of those tractors and farmers from all across the UK, and they'll be here very shortly.
Thank you, Theo Combat, and of course we'll cross back throughout the show as those farmers start to arrive. Thank you very much. Now, time for our spring giveaway, and it's the final week to see how you could win gadgets, a shopping spree and an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash. Make sure that you don't miss out, and here's all the details that you need to enter.
It's the final week to see how you could win big. You could win an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash that you could spend however you like. Plus, there's a further £500 of shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. We'll also give you a gadget package to use in your garden this spring. That includes a games console, a pizza oven and a portable smart speaker, so you can listen to GB News on the go. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Great stuff. Now, coming up, a theatre in London is telling white men in the audience to check their privilege before entering. Is this a step too far? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
New framework from the Department of Transport is making sure that people will have a say on whether LTNs are introduced. So councils are going to have to really find out whether residents in an area actually want them or not. Let's talk to former racing driver and motoring journalist Amanda Stretton. Amanda, good to see you. I'm surprised that councils were introducing them without any sort of consultation already, to be honest.
I know, it's an absolute mystery, isn't it? Because certainly in the area that I live, the which is in Oxford, the implementation of the low traffic neighbourhoods has been, I mean, the report that we've seen today talks about the challenge that emergency services are having getting to people who actually need them. It's also impacting all the local businesses, because people are being forced onto these main arterial routes. Those routes are now absolute gridlock. And what's been happening is these low traffic neighbourhoods have been decided by people who don't live in the area. They don't understand the way traffic moves, the times of day. And it has therefore just led to absolute chaos. So it makes perfect sense that if these schemes are going to be introduced, they're actually introduced with the support of the people who it's going to affect.
Well, and that's going to be problematic, don't you think? Because once everybody has talked it, discussed it, most residents are not going to want it.
I think you've got to understand, you know, if the vast majority of people are rejecting the proposal of a scheme that's due to be implemented, you've really got to question the viability and the sense in doing so. We want to encourage people to cycle, absolutely, but actually by causing these huge congested blocks, these arteries, I really don't think that that's necessarily the way forward.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Earlier on breakfast. Could you give me half an hour after school to be a lollipop person? You'd probably do it, wouldn't you?
Maybe.
No?
Well, it depends.
I'd do it.
Yeah, it depends if I had time.
We're going to be creating hundreds of thousands of new high-wage, high-skilled jobs, the length and breadth of the country, many in places where high-wage jobs are actually at a premium.
This isn't something that we can leave any longer. The Tories have done nothing on it for 14 years. It is causing a problem in terms of energy security.
If we start going down the road of you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that, I mean, it will be an authoritarian state.
This is an example of Catherine doing things her way. And I think when you see how the narrative spun so much out of her control, who wouldn't want to be in front of the camera addressing those people herself?
From 6, it's Breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. 5:25 is your time. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now stay with us, because very soon we're going to speak to a close friend of a teacher driven into hiding following protests at his school. That's the Batley Grammar School, accusing him of Islamophobia. 3 years on, still in hiding. We'll have an exclusive insight into his well-being. Don't go anywhere. Now, a theatre in London has again thrown white men into a culture war by telling them to check their privilege before entering. Soho Theatre's The Femmes of Colour Comedy Club is tagged as an unapologetic celebration of comedians of colour that are not cis men, whatever that means. Well, the show has already gained huge attention from the press, with huge support and resistance shown online to the theatre's requests. Well, join me now for a closer look at this is the political commentator Femi Nylander. Femi, welcome to the show. So we spoke previously about a blacks-only performance where white people weren't allowed to go, and now white men are having to check their privilege on the way in. Is this really helpful?
I mean, do you know what the words "check your privilege" mean? Are you aware
You
what it
explain
means?
to me. I think it's a word salad that means nothing. You tell me.
I mean, of course it means something. Certain groups have privileges over other people. I mean, men have privileges over women. Rich people have privileges over poor people. White people have privileges over black people in this country. It's about economic.
In what way do white people have privilege over black people in this country?
Economically, socially, in terms of access to space, in terms of relations with the police, in terms of access to healthcare. I can give you a number of statistics if you want, and we can actually get into the statistics if you want, or we can address the fact that what's happening here is outrage over nothing, really. I mean, a few days ago, you guys on this channel were trying to make a dooley-dar over the fact that Nike had a different flag. I mean, have you seen the UKIP flag? It's purple with a pound coin in the middle of it. And Nigel Farage is one of your presenters. Is your role to just make a dooley-dar over something which is, of course, privilege. Privilege is a real thing.
Femi, let's get back to this thing. Okay, so I'll throw a few stats at you. So I'm a white working class lad. My dad was a coal miner 47 years. I'm the first white lad in my family to go to university. White working class boys are the least likely to attend university right now. They are the least likely to get grade A's at A-level, GCSEs. There's not a single initiative anywhere to help them in the country. Tell me, when does their white privilege start?
Well, the thing is, what you're doing there is you're doing what's called a logical fallacy, because you're saying white working class boys are less likely than Somali boys. But what you should be doing is you should say white working class. You should be comparing white working class boys to Somali working class boys, because you're using two categorizations, and you're saying white and working class. Now, if you compare, let me finish. Let me finish, Martin. Can you just let me quickly make the point? If you compare white working class boys to Somali working class boys, that makes sense, right? But comparing white working class boys to Somali boys doesn't make sense, and you're comparing combination.
I'll explain why. If you use the metric of free school meals as the metric of poverty, it's a crude one, but it's one that's used as a yardstick, then it is true that white working class boys perform worse than black working class boys of the same backgrounds. There you go. I'll just prove white privilege is the myth.
Wait, what do you mean free school meals? So you're saying that white working class boys receive less free school meals?
I'm saying if you take the same socio-economic data in terms of the economic background of a family, and then you take whiteness and blackness, the white kids do worse. I just prove you wrong.
But what percentage of white kids are working class, and what percentage of black kids are working class? We just saw statistics the other day that show the majority of black boys are supposedly in poverty. And so can you say the same about white people? So, you can make these distinctions, but the point is that most black boys are in working class environments, and a lot of white boys are not. So the point you're making is a complete distortion of the facts. The fact of the matter is, if you say there's 2% of women that are working class, for example, and then you start going on big rants about that 2%, well, it doesn't change the fact that it's only 2%, and that's not a real statistic.
Simply laying out data which proves that white privilege is a myth.
No, but it's not. It's not a myth. Like black people are 7 times more likely to be stopped and searched.
Tell me then.
Your role in this show.
Let's get back to the point. Why should white people have to check their privilege before they're allowed to go and see a theatre show?
Okay. I'll answer your question. I just have one very quick question. It's a yes or no question that you can answer me, and then I'll get onto it. Do you think that UKIP should change its flag, like Nike should change its flag? Or is your role just to get people riled up over something which has no because it's a fake? This is the point. This show just you have double standards on everything.
I've got nothing to do with
standards on everything.
And look, I've got nothing to do with UKIP, and changing a political party's flag would be a decision they will presumably make themselves. Nike decided to change the England flag, and the FA endorsed it without any consultation with fans. You're the one now comparing apples and pears.
No, I mean it's a British flag. Everyone was like, British flag, don't change the British flag. There's a purple British flag with a £1 coin in the middle, and one of your hosts was proposing it for years. And then as soon as Nike does the same thing, it's like, oh my God, we're going to culture all this. No, the point of the matter is that your role on this show is to get people riled up over nothing. A theatre has said, check your privilege at the door. Have they done anything? Have they actually done anything? They didn't even they've not turned white theatre goers away like the other show. They've not, and the other show didn't even turn white theatre goers away. They just said one night for only black people weren't
allowed into that show the other week, Femi, you had no problem with it.
They are allowed in. And when I said they are allowed in.
When I said to you, would you have any problem with a single black person being turned away from any theatre in the land for even 1 hour, you couldn't answer the question because you know you'd be annoyed about that.
I don't have a problem with that. If it's, for example, if there was a specific night that people from a Hindi background wanted to have for shows about that, then they can have one night. Like, of course, I didn't say that I wouldn't stay in some cases. That's fine. When did I say that? I could look back at the footage, but I don't think I did say that. You're putting words in my mouth. The point of the matter is,
said, would you be happy if a single black person was barred from a single performance for even 1 hour? Would you be happy about that?
It depends on the circuit. Like I say, if for example people of a South Asian background want to do something specific and want to have one night where it's about them, then I wouldn't have a problem with it. The point is that if you go to any theatre in any country, in the country, you're likely, and I've worked in theatre, I know this, you're likely to have 99% of the audience being white. So we don't need to have, like, white people are the majority and they're privileged in this country. And so we don't need specific initiatives to help them.
Maybe that's because people would rather do something else. I don't see many working class people at the theatre either. They go to the football.
I agree. That's a wonderful point. You should get more working class people involved in the arts and theatre. We can agree on that.
Well, maybe they don't want to go. It's a free country after all. Femi Nylander, thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure. Great sport. Now, there's lots more, not quite sure what we achieved there. But anyway, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock later in the show as the countdown continues to the Easter weekend. I ask whether it's going to be a complete and utter washout. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. The Chinese ambassador has been summoned to the Foreign Office today. It comes after the government said hackers affiliated to the Chinese state were responsible for 2 malicious cyber campaigns on the Electoral Commission and parliamentarians. The government says national cybersecurity support services will be making sure political parties are properly protected from foreign influence in the run-up to the general election. Scott Benton has resigned as an MP. The Blackpool South MP was already facing a recall petition. He's now running as an independent and was found to have broken Commons rules when he was caught out by the Times newspaper offering to act on behalf of gambling investors. An independent panel upheld a decision by the Standards Committee, which Mr Benton had appealed against. And former ISIS bride Shamima Begum has lost an initial bid to challenge the removal of her British citizenship at a Supreme Court. Last year, Miss Begum lost her first appeal against the decision to revoke her citizenship on national security grounds at the Special Immigration Appeals Commission. Miss Begum was found in a Syrian refugee camp after travelling to the country to join ISIS as a 15-year-old. And Sarah, Duchess of York, says she's full of admiration for the Princess of Wales after announcing that she was undergoing treatment for cancer. Writing on social media, she said she hopes the Princess will now be given time, space and privacy to heal. Those are the latest top stories. Do sign up for GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Let's take a quick look at the markets for you, shall we? Well, the pound will buy you $1.2640 and €1.1665. The price of gold is £1,720.99 an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed for the day today at 7,917 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. Now, still to come, the protests at a Yorkshire grammar school which drove a teacher into hiding. Well, we're going to hear from one of his close friends on what happened after the grammar school teacher was accused of being Islamophobic. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Dewbs & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
You think this country needs new gas power stations. Apparently, this will all be about trying to get some form of energy security. Rishi Sunak has upset people today with this suggestion, people saying that actually this would do more damage to climate change than it would do good. Where are you on it, Richard?
I'll tell you exactly where. We need a lot more gas power stations and nuclear power stations because quite often the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Last week, we imported 16% of all our electricity because we haven't got enough capacity in the UK, and we're now totally over-reliant on renewables.
The part of the problem is the lack of storage capacity, which the government has finally got round to addressing. I think this as backup is actually quite a sensible idea. But they are not doing anything, as far as I can tell. At the moment, it will be retrofitted to have storage capability, which seems to be utterly bonkers. I mean, anyone who's got solar panels, you know very well you're storing up energy. So it's about storage as much as production. They could have gone, 20 years ago, we could have had nuclear power. We could have done more. We haven't looked far enough ahead in the future, and we are in grave danger of making the same mistake. I mean, the other side of this is what is the difference going to be? Blackouts are you know, they're irritating and...
Irritating? It'd be disastrous. It would
they
literally destroy
would be
our
now.
economy.
Well, they would be now, but, you know, some of us remember 3-day weeks and things like that. And in fact, you know, I grew up thinking that everybody had, you know, at least a couple of days a week when they had to eat off a Primus stove and things.
This is, again, I don't want to harp on, but this is one of the problems in the politics in our country, isn't it? So many politicians, they just think in election cycles. They just think, what can I do and say to get my own backside re-elected at the next general election? They're not always looking ahead at, actually, politics aside, what is genuinely the best thing for this country.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:39. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now to a stark warning that chilling levels of harassment are posing a serious threat to our democratic way of life. Dame Sara Khan, who's the government's independent social cohesion advisor, has published a damning report today that found that more than 75% of the public feel that they have to refrain from speaking their minds. The report has come out just after the 3rd anniversary of the protests at the Batley Grammar School, after a teacher there showed a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad during a lesson. And that teacher is still in hiding to this day, over 3 years on. As part of her review, Dame Sara is recommending the establishment of an exclusion zone for protests outside of schools to try and put a stop to this. Well, joining me now, I'm delighted to be joined by an acquaintance of that very teacher, Paul Halloran. Paul, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. A report, Paul, that many people will feel is 3 years too late. Nevertheless, an important report calling for exclusion zones around schools to prevent anything like Batley ever happening again. Paul, is it too little too late?
Very much so, Martin. I concur with yourself. I don't understand why something has taken 3 years to totally exonerate the teacher, totally call out the people that should have supported him who never did. I would not subscribe to an exclusion zone around the school. I would make it clear that the people couldn't harass people, pupils and teachers at the gate, and should they choose to do so, I would have them arrested.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree. Very touching, Dame Sara said in her report, Paul, that the Batley school teacher was totally and utterly failed, not given any support, not even recognised as a victim of crime. And Paul, when she spoke earlier to our political editor, Christopher Hope, she said that she met with the teacher on 2 occasions, very, very moved by his plight. Told us he was suffering from what she thinks is PTSD, and no financial compensation, to her knowledge, has been made to the teacher. Paul, this is an utter failing of British society, of a teacher who's been completely and utterly abandoned. Do you agree?
Most definitely. This is a man I know personally. This is a man who has many Muslim friends, neighbours. He shared Eid-gifts with people. This is a man who's a religious studies teacher. He was doing his job. He was giving a lesson plan. In fact, if I'm correct, the assistant with him on that day was a Muslim as well who gave it. So why was he ridden out of town, his life threatened, and he had to pick his family up and his children and disappear overnight, and he was just forgot about and absolutely abandoned by many people. The MP at the time, Tracy Babin, his existing MP now, Kim Ledbetter, the councillor Shabir Pandor, who's the leader of Kirklees Council, who ironically, his brother, Mufti Mohammed Pandor, who ironically, as I've said, runs an organisation in relation to peace. How ironic is that? You know, these people have just abandoned him, and it's an absolute disgrace. He was thrown under the bus by his headmaster. His headmaster should have come out and met the Boeing mob and said, no, we're not having this. And he just told the teacher to go, and they left him. Scandalous.
Oh, obviously, Paul, the people you mentioned there, they're not here to defend themselves, but nevertheless, you maintain a regular contact with the teacher, don't you? How is he?
Listen, I'm in contact with him now and again, and I have spoke to him. I talked through an intermediary as well. And the last time I spoke to the teacher, he wasn't in a good place, you know, and why would he be? You know, he's looking over his shoulder all the time. He's living in fear. If headlights appear wherever, he's scared. It's just an absolutely abhorrent situation. He's trying to get on with his life, and I understand that. But there's nobody whatsoever that have offered him support. You know, we're told that he doesn't want any publicity, and we fed this narrative. He's told me personally that's nonsense. We've run a GoFundMe page for him, and it's been very successful, and it's helped him. You know, so we're out there, we're doing what we can for him, and we've just tried from minute one to highlight that it could be my son, it could be somebody else's son, it could be somebody else's daughter. I've said this from day one. This is the thin end of the wedge, and it's okay to just say this guy, well, he's collateral damage on the altar of political correctness. No, this next week it could be me, it could be you, it could be anybody, and people need to stand up and fight against this.
No crime was logged against him, according to Dame Sarah Khan, which is just astonishing when you think about it, how far this has gone, Paul. Is there any way back for the teacher? What does he want out of life?
Well, I'm sure he wants to be within his social network where all his family are and where he was brought up and he's lived all his life. But that is not an option. You know, you just have to look at other instances that have happened all over the world and on mainland Europe. You know, that people unfortunately have lost their lives, and it's okay people coming out within the community and saying he's safe to come back, which people have done that. Some of the Muslim community have said, look, he's safe to come back and pick up his job. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't wear with me. You know, this man fears for his life, and it's understandable because the Boeing mob that were outside the gates over those days, you know, were demanding his head on a plate as such, metaphorically speaking.
Paul, could you please pass on my heartfelt wishes? You know, I've been to see you in Batley a few times over this. I've spoken in the town square with you over this. You know, I'm feeling very emotional even listening to you saying this, Paul. I'm sure many people watching this feel the same sentiment. It's a total aberration what happened to him. Can you please make sure he gets messages? There are many people out here on GB News watching today who have just sent good wishes, well wishes, heartfelt messages of love. And thank you for coming on today and talking to us. And please make sure he gets those messages.
Most definitely. And if I could just say that the GoFundMe page for a teacher is still running. If people want to Google Batley Grammar School teacher and GoFundMe, they are still able to donate. And trust me, the donations will be heartfelt received and they are needed.
Paul Halloran, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, mate. Now, spokesman for Batley Multi-Academy Trust said those events required us to support all our students, their families and our staff, including the teacher involved for whom we provided counselling and wider support. We remain clear that we delivered on these responsibilities and that we followed due process. Now, coming up, the Met Office has told the public that people should be ready for temperatures to fall into figures as low as 5 degrees centigrade. Well, it is Easter after all. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The rest of this week promises, more rain. Some pretty heavy showers around, staying generally on the cool sides, but there'll be some brighter spells. As you might imagine, with that kind of weather forecast, it's low pressure that's controlling our weather situation and will continue to do so through this week. Wet weather moving across Scotland, quite a bit of snow over some of the hills here, and a strong and cold wind blowing to the east. Making a little drier in places across England and Wales through the night, but further rain likely to affect parts of the south of Northern Ireland and wintry showers in the far north. Temperatures dropping down into single figures, may not be far off freezing to start the day in parts of Scotland. The snowy weather should ease over the mountains through the course of tomorrow, but still staying pretty showery on the Moray Firth and the east coast of Scotland, and feeling pretty chilly here too. After a largely dry start, we'll see more rain then coming into parts of England and Wales. A wetter day in the southeast, rain spreading into the Midlands and across Northern Ireland, but something a bit brighter for South Wales and southwest England, and some sunny spells for eastern England too. But still, for most of us, temperatures only around about average or below in Scotland, where the wet weather will continue into Wednesday, and then we're looking at bands of showers coming in from the west. So some brighter spells in between, bit of sunshine here and there, but you'll always be dodging the downpours through Wednesday and indeed for the rest of this week and in the run-up to Easter.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now, could winter be set to make a small yet unwelcome comeback this weekend? The Met Office has told the public that people should be ready for temperatures to fall as low as 5 degrees Celsius. Brace yourselves. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the Director of Weather Trending, John Hammond. John, what on earth is going on? It should be Easter in the air. It feels like the beast from the east is back.
Well, as you said a few moments ago, Martin, it is Easter after all. And you can't rely on Easter weather, can you? It's a fickle mistress, certainly. And one of the reasons for that, actually, is because Easter, of course, is not fixed in the calendar. It can vary from the third week in March to the third week in April. So sometimes Easter can be hot and sunny. Sometimes it can be cold and wet. Actually, some of your viewers might be interested to know the definition of Easter, the way it is set. It's the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the equinox. So we had the equinox last week, got a full moon now, which means, hey presto, Easter will be next weekend. Doesn't look pretty, to be honest, Martin. I think we'll give it a, 5, 6, 7 out of 10. I think there will be some places that see sunshine through this weekend, but get out and enjoy it while you can, because rain clouds will never be too far away. I'm actually in a deserted beer garden in Buckinghamshire, and there could well be a few deserted beer gardens up and down the country, I think, through this weekend. Not a complete write-off, Martin. There will be some dry, brighter spells, but it ain't going to be warm and sunny right the way through the Easter weekend. There will be some rain around. I think most of the rain initially, Martin, will be across Scotland, Northern Ireland. Here, pretty cool, pretty wet. There will be some glimpses of sunshine further south and east, Good Friday into Saturday, but actually things going downhill even across the south come Easter Sunday into Easter Monday. And actually, ironically, Martin, as we head into April, looks like turning colder. next week doesn't look pretty at all. Northerly winds, and as you mentioned, some places struggling to get above 5 degrees. I'm a bit of a doom monger, aren't I? I mean, it could be worse. I could be giving it a 2 or 3 out of 10, but I think 5 or 6 out of 10 will be pretty apt for this Easter weekend, I'm afraid.
And I've got to say, John, Mother Nature never lies. Normally, all my bluebells are up by now. Only one of them has been brave enough to put its head up, John.
Yeah, although having said that, Martin, I mean, it's been a very mild winter, and we're getting used to milder weather. So when chilly conditions do come along, it's all a bit of a shock to the system, isn't it? For prospects of really warm and sunny weather, my weather charts look bereft of optimism, I have to say. For the next, couple of weeks, we're going to need the layers, we're going to need the waterproofs, and if you've got any frost-sensitive plants in the garden, bluebells included, then you've got to watch out, because I think late frosts are a distinct possibility. And for some, Martin, some of the white stuff, mostly, as always, up over the mountains of Scotland. But don't be at all surprised, and I know the kids are on their Easter holidays next week, don't be at all surprised if there's some snow elsewhere across the country through next week. There you go.
Well, I suppose I should say thank you. Thank you, John Hammond, the Director of Weather Trending. And if anything, mate, I think I'll be joining you in a beer garden to drown our sorrows. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show. Well, that's all from me for now. Jubes & Co. is up next. But we have had loads and loads of emails in about the Batley Grammar School teacher. I'll make sure to read some of those out tomorrow. But don't forget to join us from 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel, followed by Britain's Newsroom at 9:30 with Andrew and Bev. Then, of course, Tom and Emily with Good Afternoon Britain from midday. And then I'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. So happy we spoke to Paul Halloran for an update on the Batley Grammar School teacher, Dame Sarah Khan's report out today. Court saying he's been completely abandoned and failed, totally failed. That is how he felt. Loads and loads of messages from you, passing those messages on, and I'll make sure they get passed on to him. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. But first, here's your weather with Alex Deakin.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The rest of this week promises more rain, some pretty heavy showers around, staying generally on the cool sides, but there'll be some brighter spells. As you might imagine, with that kind of weather forecast, it's low pressure that's controlling our weather situation and will continue to do so through this week. Wet weather moving across Scotland, quite a bit of snow over some of the hills here, and a strong and cold wind blowing to the east. Made it a little drier in places across England and Wales through the night, but further rain likely to affect parts of the south of Northern Ireland and wintry showers in the far north. Temperatures dropping down into single figures, may not be far off freezing to start the day in parts of Scotland. The snowy weather should ease over the mountains through the course of tomorrow, but still staying pretty showery on the Moray Firth and the east coast of Scotland, and feeling pretty chilly here too. After a largely dry start, we'll see more rain then coming into parts of England and Wales. A wetter day in the southeast, rain spreading into the Midlands and across Northern Ireland, but something a bit brighter for South Wales and southwest England, and some sunny spells for eastern England too. But still, for most of us, temperatures only around about average or below in Scotland, where the wet weather will continue into Wednesday, and then we're looking at bands of showers coming in from the west. So some brighter spells in between, bit of sunshine here and there, but you'll always be dodging the downpours through Wednesday, and indeed for the rest of this week and in the run-up to Easter.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Want to be a winner just like Phil?
Obviously, whoever wins it next is going to be as happy as I was, and they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
Enter our massive spring giveaway. There's £12,345 in tax-free cash to give your finances a spring boost. We'll also send you on a shopping spree with £500 worth of vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. You'll also get a garden gadget package. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats, and £12,345 in tax-free cash, cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be